this meeting to order. Today is November 21st. This is a superintendent's workshop, and at this point, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank everyone for coming. The purpose of the workshops is to share information. We have 3 topics today that we're going to cover. The first is a presentation about a recycling program that we're going to pilot at 4 of our schools in our district. It's a partnership we're doing with the county commission. And then the second presentation is going to be a series of board policy revisions. As we always react to legislative changes and other needs, we have to revise some of our policies and how we operate. So there's a series of riveting board policy that we're going to get into a little bit later. And then the third presentation will be about some results of a survey about possible changes to the school start times for next year. But first up, we're going to have a presentation on a recycling pilot program that we're going to put into 4 of our schools. And it's really a great partnership that we've engaged in with the county. Stephanie Fonville is going to be giving the presentation. She's the Recycling Education and Marketing Coordinator for the Solid Waste Disposal District, which is part of the county. And she's really responsible for this happening. She came to us with the idea of doing some recycling in our schools, and then she actually wrote for and received 2 different grants to fund these pilot projects. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. She's going to begin the presentation. We actually had this same presentation with the county commissioners earlier today, because again, this is a partnership between the school district and the county commission. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, wonderful. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to speak with you today. I'm really, really excited about this program. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background. It started because I'm the educator for the county, so I give a lot of presentations. And I had a number of teachers reach out to me over the last year or so, and they were looking for recycling containers. They wanted to bring recycling to their classrooms. And unfortunately, I didn't have any containers for them. I had to tell them I'm more on the education side, so I'd love to come in and talk to you, but I don't have containers for you. So I started looking around, and I have Barbara Heineken with me here today. She's with the Carton Council. Carton Council is a nonprofit organization. It was basically started by carton manufacturers who wanted to see their cartons be recycled. I had met her at a conference. We had gotten to talking, and they have a school carton recycling grant program that they had. So discussions led to looking at the grant, looking for other grants, applying for the grants, and reaching out to the school district and trying to see if we can get some pilot programs going on in our schools. So today I wanted to tell you a little bit about the program. We've met with the teachers, we've met with the staff. Everyone's really excited and enthusiastic about it. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the program and about the 2 grants that we received, and give also Barbara an opportunity to help us out a little bit. She's done pilot programs like this in other school districts as well. So she's been great with a fountain of information and wisdom for me to get this rolling as well. So as I said, I'm with the county. I just call myself the recycling coordinator because I have a very long title. I give presentations. I teach kids about recycling and do the advertising and education for the county. So for the schools, as a recycling educator, I believe that recycling is very important. And as a parent and as part of the community, I also believe that it's very, very important to teach our kids to recycle. We really want to get and cultivate a culture of sustainability in our kids and at our schools. Just getting them into the habit of recycling so that they not only know how to recycle and that it's important, but they can bring it home to their parents. They can bring it home to their family and friends. And also when they grow up and mature into adults, then they can also bring that out into their community. So I believe that recycling in schools is very, very important. So the vision for this program, it's a pilot program. We want to provide the tools for a campus-wide recycling program at the selected schools, which if this is successful, we would love to see this expanded to the other schools. So essentially this will be a model for them. We'll show what works, we'll figure out how to collect it, how to get the kids engaged, all of that, and then we can expand that to the other schools. So the schools that we chose, working with Dr. Rendell and some of the staff, we looked at Pelican Island Elementary, Storm Grove Middle School. Representing the high school, we have Vero Beach High School Freshman Learning Center. And then also we had enough resources to include a magnet school, so we chose Rosewood Magnet Elementary School. So I went to these schools, I visited with the principals, we walked around the campus, decided how many containers they would need and what they would need, and got them excited and figured out how we can get the students involved. So essentially what this program does, it provides tools for recycling. So of course that includes recycling containers. We want to put containers in the classrooms, all the classrooms, in the offices, the copier rooms, teacher workshops, lounges, hallways, the outdoor areas. A number of the schools have outdoor dining areas where the parents will come and meet with their students. We really wanted recycling to be very, very visible throughout the schools. The kids really understand the importance of it and really learn to look for it. We also want to put containers in the cafeteria. It's where a lot of recyclable materials are made. And in order to make this successful, one thing is providing the containers, but also the other part of it is trying to get the custodial staff on board and working with them to try to figure out a good way for them to transport it from the classroom out to the dumpsters in the back. So we did some research. We looked at some other schools, what the other districts were doing, and we found these tandem dollies. They're also called duo dollies. You can essentially put a garbage container on one side, that other side folds down. You could put a recycling container on the other side, so the custodial staff can just push that one cart around, empty the recycling in one, the garbage in the other. It should be the same amount of waste material, it's just now being separated into the garbage and the recycling container. So transportation-wise, it's the same amount of material, and hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to empty it into the dumpster because you have a smaller amount in each of those containers. So providing all those tools for them so that they have everything that they need to make this a successful program. The cafeterias can get a little bit tricky because we have all different types of materials. Kids have a lot of questions of what can be recyclable. And I actually did a program, I worked with a student in Gifford Middle School, so I went to their school during their lunch period, and a lot of students came up to me with milk cartons that were full of milk or mostly full of milk. So one of the solutions that the Carton Council had suggested for cafeterias was to have this 5-gallon bucket that you could empty the liquids into the bucket and then toss the container into the recycling bin. There are a number of benefits to this. This means we can recycle those cartons, first of all. It also means that the recycling is a lot lighter for the custodial staff to pick up because all the liquid is now in that bucket. So they can go, they can dump that bucket down the drain, and they can take the recyclables out to the dumpster. It's a lot lighter and a lot easier to handle, and it's a lot cleaner as well because it doesn't get quite as wet. So this picture over on the left-hand side, when I went to speak with Pelican Island Elementary School, they were really excited. They've actually already started getting their students to separate out recyclables. They're composting over there as well, so they're teaching their students to separate everything out. They already have a team of students that's helping other students. So they're really ambitious, and that picture is actually them getting started. So they're looking forward to that program, and we can't wait to get them some containers. And we're hoping that we'll use this model for the other students as well. Have a couple of volunteers at those disposal stations to help them navigate it, to learn how to dump things into the bucket, toss their recyclables in, and then make it over to the garbage container and get rid of everything else. So the very first week of the program, we've reached out to both Keep Indian River Beautiful and Waste Management. They're going to offer us some volunteers to help navigate those that little disposal station just that first week so we can get them going, and then we'll have the schools either get students to help or teachers to help. We're working with them right now on that. So the other thing that's very important is education, signage, making sure that it's very clear for these students where these materials go. Recycle Across America is a non-for-profit organization. They're working to standardize recycling labels across the nation. They have donated 100 labels per school. So they've donated 400 labels to us that we can put on these containers. We've also talked to each of the schools to have the students make posters to put up beforehand to kind of let the students know that the program's coming, that recycling's coming. They've talked about putting it on their social media pages, and then we'll also provide them any other signage that they need for this. It's always important to see how a program is working to get before and after data, so we're planning to collect some data. We have, right now, each school has a little worksheet that they go outside, they check the recycling dumpsters and the garbage dumpsters, see how full they are. So the idea is before the program starts, you have more garbage, and then once the recycling program kicks off, then the garbage will go down and the recycling will go up. So we're hoping to track that by having them just estimate about what percentage full each of these containers are. So we're doing that, and we also are going to work on a pre- and post-program survey to hand out to the students. so that we can see what the students are learning about recycling and if they understand how the program works. So hopefully they'll become a little bit clearer what they can and can't recycle. So what I wanted to do today is I really wanted to give a huge, huge thank you to our two sponsors, our two grant donors. The first one was Waste Management. They have this Think Green grant program. Basically, their goal is to try to encourage their communities that they work in to be sustainable, to try to help as much as they can to make green communities. So this Think Green grant was open to everyone in Florida, and they would submit in the application, tell them what the plans are, and they love to work with schools. So they were excited to work with Indian River County to give us a $2,500 grant to buy all these containers to get recycling in our schools. So I really wanted to say a big, big thank you to Waste Management. They're offering us not only the money, but also the volunteers to help during the cafeteria. And then also another huge, big, big thank you to the Carton Council, and I have Barbara Heineken with me here today. They gave us a $5,000 grant to buy all the containers to make this project happen. So in schools, it's obviously where you get a lot of cartons, a lot of milk containers, a lot of juice containers. So for them, they have a particular interest in schools, and they wanted to help here in Indian River County as well. And I wanted to also give a big thank you to Dr. Rendell for working with us and helping us make this program a possibility. Robert Michael also took me on all the tours of all the schools to help me get started, and then of course the staff and the principals at each of these schools. So I did want to give Barbara an opportunity to say a few words if you wanted to.
Sure. Hi, everybody. She did such a great job. I don't have much to say. I'm thrilled to be here. I live over in Hillsborough County, and we've given out a lot of grants in Florida. I'm happy to say to school districts, but we're just thrilled to be able to help with schools because, as Stephanie said, cartons are a small percentage of the waste stream at our home. It's less than 1%. But here in the schools, I mean, I can tell you Hillsborough County, is a large district. We buy over 26 million milk cartons a year. So here, I'm not sure of the number, but it's huge. And, a typical elementary school can go through 2,000 milk cartons a day, which is just a tremendous amount of waste if they're going in the garbage. And it's a great resource. Milk cartons are made out of a very high-grade paper, so very recyclable. So that's why our organization, which is, as she said, the manufacturers of the cartons and the containers, want to help see these get recycled and understand the need for a little extra help, especially in the schools. So, so we're really happy to be doing this, and she's just put together a great program, and I'm so happy to be able to help with it. So, thanks.
So thank you so much for having us here. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Sure. Okay.
Two questions. One maybe Dr. Rendell can answer, but I didn't catch the launch date. I know it's coming. And the second one would be, not so much with the students in recycling, but in the offices, there's a secure documentation destruction. So how will we, that can't be recycled because that has to be either carted off or burnt or what, whatever, destruction. So how, if you could tell me how we're going, this would be them, the staff is going to segregate that from that.
So we will safeguard all the documents that need to not go into recycling containers and dispose of them the way we already dispose of them, either shredding or sending them to the secure site, that kind of thing. So, we probably won't see as much recycling from certain, products in the office, but still the amount of paper that we're going to be able to put in the recycling containers is going to make a huge difference. But we're not going to change.
Sure. Do we have cartons, though, for, like, these are blue. So do we have a different, for our staff, because they'll have to have a difference of where to put
Yeah, I don't know if we have different colored cartons, but they know which documents need to be disposed of, the way they need to be disposed of.
Sure. And the launch date, I didn't.
Yes, actually, that was a very good point. I did not mention that. We are hoping to kick this off right after their winter break. So that'll give us enough time to order the containers, get everything in, and then maybe even bring some of the containers to the schools while the students are still out to help distribute them. So maybe the Monday following that to make sure everybody is back. But I will check with the schools and make sure that date works for them.
Thanks.
John?
I just wanted to add on, I saw something on the social media about shredding this past weekend, and I know that that was more for the general public, but is there something, I know that they actually take their shredding and they make it into toilet paper that they use in prisons. So it's kind of interesting, and a lot of those come from law firms. So
Shredded paper is
so there's
still-
a
There's
little
lot
poetic.
of paper there.
So it's interesting. But is it possible, once it's shredded, I mean, it's shredded, and it can then be reduced to pulp, baled up, and then reduced to pulp, and then turned back into paper?
Yeah.
Is there anything
We can
do
explore
with
that.
ours, or-
We'll make sure, we run everything by Suzanne, just to make sure. that-
Sure.
But can I just say, I mean,
Yeah.
shredded paper is still recycled. It's just kept separate, first of all, for documentation and done securely. So, it's done under supervision. But, I mean, that material is still recycled. And cartons are usually made into tissue products as well. So high-grade paper is usually made into tissue products. That's a
Yeah.
good thing, yeah.
Yeah, but he's also absolutely right. Shredded paper here, a lot of it does end up in the garbage. So the paper shredding event was for the residents to try to help them have an option for getting it recycled. So if you go through a paper shredding company or a secure company, there is a chance that they recycle it. I know Southeast Secure Shredding is the company we use for the paper shredding. As you mentioned, they do make that into toilet paper. So they do get that recycled. But,
Oh, I think
They got-
one area that we forgot to mention was our recycling at the football games. That is something that we implemented before, when we opened up our new stadium. So I was excited about that and went out there, so if you want to
Yeah,
talk about
Mrs. Zork is
that.
correct. Actually, the recycling at both of the comprehensive high school home football games was an offshoot of the conversations that started this program. When we first started meeting with Himanshu and Stephanie, we started talking about different ways we could recycle. And they, I think, brought up to us the idea about recycling at football games. It's been a conversation that we've had the last couple of years. And so through a conversation with them about this program, we decided to pursue recycling at the football games. So Waste Management really stepped up to the plate in that relationship, if I remember, to provide the containers. So at both those comprehensive high schools and the home football games, we had a large number of containers donated by Waste Management, I believe. And then, so our custodial staff is tasked with making sure that they are, loaded and placed properly for the morning pickup by Waste Management and that kind of thing. But, that was something that happened pretty quickly, and we were able to do it, I think, for the very first set of home football games this year, this season. But it really was an offshoot of this conversation. So something that, kind of happened after we started talking about this. But yeah, that was very well received by everybody at the home football games. I know the containers were very full at most of the games that I attended.
Sean?
Speaking to that, they donated the carts, but was the disposal and, I guess the disposal, was there a cost associated with that?
There is. Himanshu, can you cover that, or Bob?
Who's this gentleman?
We
Hi,
didn't
this is-
introduce
My name is
Himanshu.
Iman Sumeth. I'm the manager for Indian River County Solid Waste Disposal District. I don't know the dollar amount, so maybe if Michael does. I know Waste Management does charge for that pickup service. It's a weekly cost, or after every game.
Yeah, I want to say it was around $152 to pick up.
Yeah, so we did roll that into our regular costs.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. And I think, in our goal of educating students to be critical thinkers and caring, compassionate students who give back to their community and the world is such an important thing. So thank you very much for that. I had no idea the Carton Council had a consultant, so I learned so many new things here.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, I know a lot of schools have heard about this, and they're excited about it, and maybe a little jealous that they weren't selected as a school. So can we talk a little bit about how the schools were selected initially, and then maybe what this project looks like over the next few years?
Absolutely. I'll start a little bit, and then Stephanie can jump in. Pelican Island Elementary has already started this process. They're a green school. They're environmentally friendly. It's an ecological studies school. They were just awarded a Green Apple Award because they've already turned the corner on reducing their amount of garbage and increasing their amount of recyclable materials, and they already have some of these practices in place. So they were a natural first selection. We're actually going to look at Pelican Island for some best practices. Stephanie had a different picture that we didn't include in the presentation that shows the different cartons that they have set up in their cafeteria for the different types of cafeteria food and waste and how they can separate all of it. They actually have biodegradable lunch cartons, or lunch trays rather, and they've started composting there. So Pelican Island was kind of like the first one we said, hey, this is a school that's already kind of down the road, so they're going to be in the grant, in the pilot to begin with. Storm Grove Middle School had already started, again, a process of student-led a couple of years ago. So kind of we're already dipping their toe in the water with this, so that's why Storm Grove was selected. And then we wanted to look at a high school age. We want to make sure that we're doing it at all 3 levels. And since the Freshman Learning Center is a contained unit of the high school, we didn't want to try and tackle all 3,000 high school students at once. We weren't sure we could support the amount of cartons that we needed to do the main campus, either at Vero Beach High School or the main campus, the campus at Sebastian River. So the Freshman Learning Center presented itself perfectly as a microcosm, a little small section of high school students that we could handle the amount of cartons. And so once we added all of that up, we kind of had enough room, enough money, enough room in the budget to maybe do one more small school. Rosewood Magnet Elementary School kind of also does have an environmental focus, and so we talked to Rosewood and they were very interested. I believe that's how the selection process went, but Stephanie can correct me.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Essentially what we were looking for schools that were enthusiastic and excited about recycling, that had already kind of expressed an interest in being part of a pilot program like this. We were looking for schools that would be manageable in size. So the Freshman Learning Center was a perfect fit for the high schools. And I did want to mention on the second page of the handout was a picture of the cafeteria containers from another school, where the garbage, the food, and the recycling and the liquid container was. So that can kind of show that cafeteria. But that's essentially, I think you got exactly right. That's how we picked the schools.
But you're right. Several other schools have already heard about this and said, when's our turn? And well, first we need to get this up and running, and hopefully we'll have data to show that we're producing less garbage and more recyclable materials, and we're reducing our garbage output and pickup and that kind of thing. I do want to make sure that we do give a shout out to Bob Michael and John Teskey. Basically once we met with Stephanie and Himanshu and said we're going to do this, I just gave it to them, and they took care of it. And Bob's been fantastic about working with Stephanie and all the maintenance staff at all the schools that are involved and coming up with a game plan so that we're not creating more work for our maintenance staff. It's the same amount of refuse, just in different containers. And actually, I don't want to speak for Bob, but I think everybody that he's talked to is very excited about the program.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very positive.
Yes, John?
So since we operate our own garbage truck and our own garbage services, one of the ways that recycling programs reduce the cost is by downsizing the carts of the dumpsters. We wouldn't have that. Are our folks, I know that you can actually divide a garbage truck up the middle, so you put recyclables down one side and garbage down the other. And I just wonder, are our folks doing all of the hauling or of the recyclables, or is that something where waste management is also going to get involved?
So that's definitely a question for Bob. And so I have to ask Bob to come on up to the microphone so he can answer the questions and we can get them recorded. But talk a little bit about how that's going to change, if it does change at all, how we're picking up and hauling off.
Absolutely. So currently we have the solid waste truck that we pick up all the solid waste in. We don't pick up the recyclables currently. We have a container at each site, and the recyclables are put into that container. A company called Republic is currently picking that waste stream up. So, but eventually that would be the hope, is that we actually handle both sides of that waste stream.
I have a question. You said that Waste Management's going to provide all the containers for us?
They provided us with a monetary grant. So I met with the schools and we looked at some different types of containers and what would work for them. So we'll actually be using the grant to purchase all the containers. So the county will purchase the containers and then we'll coordinate getting them to the schools.
I was just wondering if that was the same group that provided them to the county. It took forever to get them out, so you may want to start ahead of think about. The other thing is you have 2 grants down here, $2,500 and $5,000. That's to get it started. What's it going to cost us after you get the program in place?
Well, we'll take a look and see kind of how this program goes, and we'll collect the before and after data, see how everything goes, and then after the fact, we'll probably come before the board again if we can to kind of discuss options of maybe expanding this and going forward. So for this one, we really wanted to make it very robust. We wanted to provide everything that we possibly could to see what was really needed. And then from there, we can take a look at the other schools, see what they need, and try to come up with some type of pricing
So
or
right
some type
now,
of
we really
estimate.
Don't know. I mean, what.
Well, the
what's
short
that
answer, one of the answers to your question is the money that's coming from the grants primarily is for hard costs, all these containers.
For four
So-
schools.
Right, so once those containers are purchased, theoretically, the cost to maintain the programs at those schools would be minimal.
Okay.
It's just if we're going to expand it to other schools, do we go after other grants, or do we use capital money, or that kind of thing? It's a good question.
So you said when it's over. It starts after the winter holiday, and it ends,
Well, I have a period of time that I'm collecting information for, and I'll periodically follow up with the schools as well. I've told them if they have any issues, please contact me immediately, but every couple of months I'll go back to them and ask, well, how is the program going? So I'm thinking maybe by the end of the school year, I can have some information for you. I can come back, we can talk about how the program launch worked, how the programs are working, and then we can make some decisions or some suggestions from there. So this program won't really end. We're giving the containers to you, we're providing them to you, and they'll be the property of the school district and the schools. And then I'll just be collecting information, especially at the beginning, to see where that difference is.
so the pilot program or the data collection phase ends?
Probably at the end of, let's see, probably February.
Yes, we'll maintain the
Right.
pilot all the way throughout the end of the school year.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But, Stephanie's being very aggressive to say she's hoping to see data to show the success of the pilot quickly.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
One more question for the gentlelady there. What do you do with all these cartons?
I don't do anything with them.
I mean, what,
We
do you
make
sell
them. No, we don't
No,
help.
but all
no,
this that
no,
we're
no.
going to give you back. we're
No,
gonna
you're
give
not
you-
giving me anything. No,
What-
no, Stephanie's got Republic Services. Republic Services is gonna pick them up with all of the other recyclables, just like at your curb. So you can put all of that in your bin. You have single stream here, right? So you put it in your curb. It's just the same in the schools. You can have one container. Republic will pick that up in their dumpster, and they have a very, very fancy, well, I don't actually know where they take it here.
It's called a material recovery facility.
But I'm not sure, where do they have one?
It's Tropical Recycling. It's located in Fort Pierce.
Okay.
It's located a little further down south. So with the rest of our single stream materials, it will be shipped down to Tropical Recycling. They'll sort everything out, and then they'll bale it up, and they'll sell it.
And they sell.
basically.
So
Right,
we
but
look
Garden
at-
Council itself doesn't get any
Right.
of the recycled materials. The Garden Council is just encouraging us to recycle.
We make the
Correct.
cartons. We represent the manufacturers, and then we just really want to help all of you and to see that they do get recycled. It's a wonderful new model in the recycling industry of the producers taking some responsibility to see that their products get recycled. That's really what it is. It's wonderful. It's about time, quite honestly. We're a leader in that, quite
But after
honestly.
we've had these cartons down at the place in Fort Pierce or whatever, that material doesn't get back to the carton manufacturers, or does it?
Oh, that's a good question. Quite honestly, cartons are manufactured out of virgin paper because it's a long fiber, so they cannot use recycled paper for that. But as I was telling this gentleman, that they're usually made into tissue products.
Made into what?
Tissue products, paper towel, toilet paper.
Huge
It's a good
need
thing.
for that.
It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. It's a high-grade paper. It's made into a good product, actually. Yeah, I mean, as opposed to being made into a cereal box, which a mixed paper, recycled mixed paper will get into a cereal box or products like that. So tissue product's a higher product because you get to use it.
You're looking for the angle, huh? The cynical nature. of
It's
it.
kind
You're
of
looking
like
for the
this thing
angle.
we've got, the county has down at Oslo Road. We're giving all of our yard debris or whatever to this company so they can make fuel out of it. And they're going to
Right.
they're going to sell that fuel to somebody, but they just want the free product. And I just wondered if it was,
Well, it costs a lot of money to
And they're not
process
doing
But
recyclables.
that toilet paper, that's a tremendous need here. Go ahead.
Thank you.
We're
And I
kind of
think
focused
that,
on toilet paper here, but anyway.
no, and you know, I didn't view it as cynical, but it did, you sprouted a question in my head, and I think it's important as board members that we do flush out the funding and thing. Obviously, we want to make good citizens, we want to be good citizens, we want to teach our children. However, I heard $1 of $150 a month extra. Is that per school? Times 4 is 600. If we go to 25 schools, then it's whatever, then it's per month, per year. And we have to know that. We have to tell the public. And that to find out if there's any back end, because this goes off, as you said, and then that gets sold. So now we are saving the county money in employees and time, but it's costing us. You know, we're not getting pickup for free, because that would be a synergy of two agencies working together. The end cause is to recycle, so you're saving us time and money and employees, and so our pickup's going to be free or at a rate. So absorbing costs is our job to, and I think you make a good point, so I want to make sure we clearly flush out the money issues. And I still think it's a good, you know, by no means am I saying negative, but it's important because that's our job to do that up here. So I want to see if I heard that right. So it's roughly $600 a month
No, ma'am.
for this pilot. It was $150.
That was for the football games.
Okay, I'm sorry. What is the cost for the extra pickup per month?
We don't know that we'll have any extra pickups. We're already on a schedule with Republic. kind of
So
thing.
that would be maybe if it's per dumpster, or is it by weight?
It's probably by weight. Currently, I'm not sure if we're even paying
By
Republic.
total, right?
Yeah, if I may.
Then I'm okay with that.
So and again, I want to applaud this board and the past board, because the school district has committed to recycling at all the schools. So not just this pilot program is unique, what we're doing now, but the schools have been recycling as probably the past 15 years that I know. And so recycling has always been available. The school district has been paying for that pickup service through Republic currently. And so there's a dumpster on site, it's single stream, and it's being picked up weekly right now. And that's a cost that probably in your budget currently. We're not looking to change any of that. So
Okay.
that's an existing cost that you have. By providing, like Stephanie said, with these grants, we're able to provide the tools to these 4 schools to kind of just demonstrate that having these tools in the classrooms and throughout the campus will actually help you divert the material that's going into your dumpster right now that the school staff picks up, will now go into the recycling container. And it is helping us keep the material out of the landfill. I mean, we've taken school buses up to the top of our landfill. That's been growing for the past 30 years. And the kids realize that this is a big mountain of trash that we've been building in our community. So getting them right in the beginning to see that they can make a difference when they're going to schools, I think is going to be a great step toward increasing recycling in our community. And we're excited to be a part of it. When I hear about revenues in terms of recycling, you know, there is some revenue in recycling, but for us as our department, you know, we have sort of the cost of our operations to build the landfills and things like that. So when some of that revenue gets back, it gets back absorbed, if you will, into the rates that we have for our residents. So we try to, if there's any revenue back, it's to trying to keep the rates where they are or keep them stable. So. But it's again, it's a process of helping us keeping it out of the landfill. The state of Florida has a goal of 75% recycling by year 2020. We're above 50% right now, so we still have a lot of work to do. And I think this is going to be a huge step for us to implement in the schools.
Okay, and it's only important that we ask these questions because maybe not in this, but we could go, let's go with tires, let's say, for our buses and things like that. Instead of hauling them to the recyclable, you know, to the county station and using up soft term dollar of people to go and bring the tires there and then have to pay to dump them off, you can do reverse bids at $1 a tire, never have anybody leave their, you know, or whatever, how much, and do a reverse bid where people come out. So you have to ask these questions
Sure.
to make sure that as a school district. So then the additional cost we would only, let's just go with it works wonderfully. The 4 schools are great. Then the additional cost would be trying, you know, funding stream would be trying to find other grants, Because this is really probably a one-time grant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we would try to then, and then, so the only smart question would be, you must know, are there other grants out there once the program kicks in?
There are if you look for them. So we actually knew about the Carton Council grant. We were going after that one, and in the process of looking for that one, we found out about the waste management grant. So they're sometimes a little hard to find, but a lot of times it's a lot of hearsay. So if I find out of any other ones, then I will definitely go after them. So it will just take some looking.
Sean?
Thank you. Speaking of funding sources, I seem to recall that it's not just a goal of the state, it's actually in statute that, Florida's counties must reach that recycling rate. And I seem to recall that there was a process whereby the county commission had to explain itself, and essentially that's why there was a consultant hired who looked at our waste stream and sort of right-sized it and gave the county some suggestion as to how to proceed. So is there, not to put you on the spot, but if there were a funding source through the county, through their ad valorem or other taxation, it would certainly be helpful to the school district to help the Board of County Commissioners move their initiative forward as, the largest employer in the county, and candidly, we have 17,500 citizens that produce waste each and every day in our schools. So I think it's a great place to start and it'd be a great place for the county to invest.
And respectfully, if I may respond, Stephanie is an employee of the county, and she has put tremendous resources in pursuing these grants, going after the grants, writing the grants, visiting all the schools. So I know it's not a dollar value that you can associate with it, but I do want to say that this wouldn't be possible in terms of even getting these grants and moving this pilot forward if we didn't commit, and support Stephanie in going after this stuff and helping the schools. So, and again, like you said, she'll continue to pursue other grants. I'm happy, and I think this will be a successful pilot. I'm happy at a future, I think we have commissioners that would be supportive. I think that we will approach our commission in the future meeting to share the results of the pilot, and we can, if I read between the lines, ask for some support from them on maybe expanding the program to other schools. We certainly understand why some schools are jealous and would love to say starting the next fiscal year or school year that we're able to see the result of this and implement it to all the schools, but it's going to take dollars. I mean, this is about less than $2,000 per school. So, you got to figure out coming up with the rest of the money. And so maybe there could be a partnership between the school board and the county commission. And maybe that sort of approach to implement this at the rest of the schools is something that could be maybe considered by both boards and at a future meeting.
Sure, that'd be great.
Good question. Any other ones? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
All right, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
We need to,
No, I want to echo Himanshu's comments that Stephanie really made this happen. She did all the legwork. She's the one that's been visiting the schools. She wrote the grants. She's done all the research. So we want to thank her for all of her hard work. These 4 pilots will be very successful, and then hopefully we can look to expand down the road. So thank you, guys.
thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
We could take a 5-minute break. We set up the next presentation.
Okay. Convene the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to begin the process of sharing with the board some suggested policy revisions. This is the annual hunt and peck process that we go through the different policies, and we'll try to take our time and walk through it. What I suggest that the board members do is to open up their red folder, take out the first 3 pages, because that's the spreadsheet that has each of the suggested changes notated, and then you could turn your binder back to its normal left to right disposition or east to west or whatever. And so you could have, my suggestion is to have the spreadsheet in one hand and then flip through the policies as we go. Just my suggestion, though. But,
Give me some room.
and also for the board members to review, a lot of times a policy will be mirrored in 3 or 4 different sections of the policy manual. For example, the first policy that we're going to review is actually in 3 different sections. So it's actually listed on your spreadsheet 3 different times. So when we tackle it the first time, we'll actually be able to cross it off 2 or 3 other times. We're going to go through the policy reviews kind of topic by topic, so not necessarily in the order of the policy manual, more like in order of who's responsible for those areas or which department is responsible for those areas. So the first few that we're going to tackle are ones that I'm bringing forward because they're basically general policies that fall under the direction of the superintendent. Mr. Green's actually associated with some of these as well. The first one on your list, it says policy 1120.01, and you may notice a couple lines down there says 3120.01, and then a 4120.01. So those all 3 are the same. So 1120.01, 3120.01, and 4120.01 are all the same. What we're proposing in these sections is to add some language to kind of reinforce our move towards unitary status. So if we turn, it's actually the very first policy in your book in the 1000s tab. So if you look to the very first policy that you can come across, this is the suggested addition. This is all new language to go at 1120.01. So 1120 is our general hiring practices for administrative staff. 3120 is the general hiring practices for instructional staff. 4120 is the general hiring practice for support staff. So this addition, this additional language, we're proposing to adopt in all 3 sections. So this language we're proposing to adopt in the administrative section, the instructional section, and the support section. And what this really does is put in policy some of the practices we already have in place. We are pursuing unitary status, so one of the things we want to do is assure the community that when we achieve unitary status, we will still follow the things that we need to follow in order to meet unitary status. One of those is to make sure that we have a workforce that's reflective of our community. We have a diverse community, so we want to have a workforce that's diverse as well. So if you take a look at the suggested policy, and I'm actually going to read through it line by line in this. Anybody objects?
No.
But it's the same in all 3 sections, and it's the only policy I'm going to read line by line. But I do think it's important. So this new policy would be called Recruitment and Retention of a Diverse Employment Staff. The school board recognizes that all district staff should reflect the broad diversity of backgrounds that characterize Indian River County. Diversity in employment at both the school and district level provides students of all backgrounds and abilities with examples of achievement through education. A diverse workforce represents an extension of a student's home, neighborhood, and community. Furthermore, one means of achieving a diverse workplace is to encourage and recruit applications for all vacant positions from individuals of widely diverse backgrounds. The goal of this policy is to maintain a diverse workforce at all levels of employment within the district through recruitment, hiring, training, promotion, and personnel management practices that are administered in a manner which furthers the principles of equal employment opportunity. This policy neither requires the hiring or promotion of any applicant or employee by any reason of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, disability, age, religion, or marital status, but rather assures all qualified persons of an equal employment opportunity. So the statement there that, those 2 paragraphs basically state that we want to have a diverse workforce. We're committed to that. We think it's important. It's not only just for operations, but also it'll impact our students. So the next section is about some recruitment activities. And again, we do these things, but they're not actually in policy. The superintendent shall direct staff to carry out ongoing recruitment activities within the Human Resources Department, which should focus on widely disseminating information about vacancies so as to reach a group of potential applicants broadly reflecting geographic, gender, racial, and ethnic diversity. If such activities include recruitment trips or visits by district staff to communities and/or educational institutions, such trips should include visits to institutions and locations that, taken as a whole, reflect that broad diversity. So in other words, our recruiting plan is going to be wide. The superintendent or designee shall take appropriate steps to inform all staff who are involved in the employment process of the board's support for and commitment to achieving diverse staffs of well-qualified employees from widely varying backgrounds. This provision applies in particular to school site managers who review applications for instructional staff positions, conduct interviews, and make hiring recommendations. This part of the policy kind of answers that question that sometimes people say, well, the district seems to be committed to hiring a diverse workforce, but individual buildings may not. Well, it's actually in policy now that that's a focus. Direct the Department of Human Resources to provide guidance to staff involved in the employment and promotional processes concerning appropriate, educationally sound, and legally valid methods to evaluate applicants that consider a candidate's potential contribution to staff diversity at a particular school, program, or location. Part 3, require that an annual written report be prepared containing information and conclusions regarding the board's staff diversity, including diversity in classified, instructional, professional, and administrative personnel at the school district level. At a minimum, the written annual report shall contain the following information. Information concerning the number of instructional, professional, administrative, and classified personnel at each school. The information collected shall contain the gender, racial, and ethnic identification of these employees. Information on those employees identified as 12-month employees who work in the administrative office of the district. In Part C, the report may also make recommendations to guide and assist instructional staff who desire to gain the experience and training that will qualify them for promotional, and contain information regarding the recruitment activities of the Human Resources Department as provided for in this policy. And lastly, a comparison of the diversity of the staff within the previous years, including diversity in classified, instructional, professional, and administrative personnel at the school level. We already provide a report like this, but again, it wasn't required necessarily in policy, but by putting this in there, we're requiring that. Present the findings of the annual written report to the board at a public meeting of the board regarding these matters, along with any recommendations the superintendent may have. And then provide the findings to any other individuals as may be necessary with a copy of the annual written report for conducting meetings as necessary to address any findings or conclusions contained in the report regarding staff diversity. So again, not only are we going to have this report, we're going to present it to the board and we'll make it available to anybody who needs to see it. 6 and 7, ensure the annual written report to the board shall be made publicly available to any person or organization via the district's website and through other reasonable means upon request. And 7, the recruitment policy is intended to produce a pool of applicants for vacant positions advertised by the district that is as diverse as possible. It is not intended to require, establish, or support racial or ethnic quotas in the employment process, nor does it confer any additional legal rights on any applicant, employee, or prospective applicant and is otherwise prescribed by law. So this policy was developed in accordance with Ms. D'Agresta. We reviewed this together several times to make sure that we had language that would support the fact that we're committed to having a diverse workforce, but not box us into any areas that we didn't want to be boxed into. Questions?
I do have a question. Explain the training back here that I read that. What are we going to do to provide the training to make sure that we can take the diversity within our school district employees and move them ahead? What type of commitment do we have on that?
So we have training programs already in place for people who are in certain positions that want to move up. For example, teachers who want to move up into administration. We already have those programs in place. We make sure that those programs are equal and open access to any of our employees, no matter what race or ethnic background they have, income level, or anything like that. So it's just making sure we have equal access to all those training programs so they have opportunities to advance within the district. As we've seen, we actually have a really strong track record of advancing our minorities in our district.
So our training, basically, what we have now is for the teachers, but what do we have for the support staff that want to move up into being teachers?
So we don't offer the courses that you're talking about. We have started this partnership with IRSC to maybe offer that training. That's not part of this plan.
Anything else? Okay, go ahead.
So this policy, we're proposing to adopt it in 1120, 3120, and 4120. So in all three sections of our employee practices, hiring of administrators, instructional, and support personnel. The next one, 3120 and 4120 go together. So the second and fourth row, 3120, employment of instructional staff, 4120, employment of support staff. This is the same policy that we're actually asking to implement in both. So if you turn to the tab 3000, instructional, and so the very first page inside that tab of 3000 instructional, you'll see the new policy there in green. Talked with most of the board members about this. Right now, when we offer employment to someone and they accept and we go through the reference check process and the background screening and everything, they can't start work until they're approved by the board at a regularly scheduled school board business meeting. This language would allow those persons to start immediately upon clearing all of the background check and whatever other pre-employment screenings that we have. They could start work and they would still be required to be approved by the board. If approved by the board at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, everything would be fine. If not, then they would be terminated and then we would pay them for the time worked. So the language there basically states that, you know, once they pass all of the screening requirements, they could begin work immediately pending board approval. So did I get that? All right.
Any question?
So, Dr. Rendell, can I give you an example today of a situation why this is important?
Absolutely.
So, at tonight's board meeting, the superintendent will be asking for an addition to the personnel recommendation for a teacher who cleared this morning, the background check. This is a position at one of our highest need Title I schools, lowest 300, that we have had challenges keeping staff employed, gone through a couple new teachers, and the process for hiring for the school, they've been working on this since early November. You have to post, you interview, you do references, you do calls. So there's not another board meeting until December 12th. Currently, there's a substitute in this class, and that would require, not a long-term sub, just various subs. That would, a lot of disruption. So we're going to be asking to make an amendment to the personnel. We believe for the safety and well-being of this particular class at this school that it's essential. This policy, if adopted, would have allowed us today, once they cleared this morning, they have done their fingerprinting, their background, all reference checks, we've cleared them in HR, we would be able to conditionally employ them at the school and start tomorrow, instead of wait or having to come with an emergency item or wait until December 12th. So that's an example of where this could benefit the schools getting this is a qualified candidate with Title I experience, a veteran teacher that we want to make sure we don't lose over the next 3 weeks because they're currently in another district. So I just wanted to share that example.
Right. Real life example of what this policy would allow us to avoid.
I do have a question sort of related to that, and I've been asked this question. If we have, for example, we have a long-term sub that we're hiring for a teaching position for the classroom, if it takes 3 weeks to get them a board approved, but they've been working 3 weeks in that capacity, are they being paid as a long-term sub, or are they paying in their new capacity?
So long-term subs, I believe after 21 days in the same position, they switch to the long-term sub pay. So they would be a regular sub for the first 21 days?
Well, I'm just using that as an example. So I just want to know if someone currently is working in the district in another capacity and we're going to approve them for another position coming up at another board meeting, but in that meantime, they've already started that position, are we paying them?
Oh, in this policy you mean? This would employ them in the new position at the time we clear.
Okay.
So in this example, they would start as a teacher. Let's say they had been a long-term sub or they've been a teacher assistant or something else. They would start as a teacher tomorrow if this policy moves through the public
So
you know, we
yes.
have to have public input and approval, but yes, it would put them into their new position, starting the day after they've cleared everything through HR.
Mr. Semchuk. I yield. Mr. Semchuk.
Thank you. First of all, I think this is great, and let me tell you why. Because over the summer, I know there's always that rush before school opening that, you know, they get cleared, but they can't go in, or, you know, maybe they're making a room ready or something, I don't know. But they're, you know, I just feel that this is great. Also, I know in the past that we've had, you know, they pass, and that's the crucial part, that they pass the background, they pass the reference, they pass all the requirements. The formality and the pomp and circumstance of coming to the board, even in a month such as this month or next month when there's a long period of time. At the point when it gets to the, in general, when it gets to the board, and we've talked about this with the attorney, you know, terminations is a different story with cause, justifications, but hiring as a board, we would have to come up with a real good reason why we would deny an employment. We would have to, and it just can't be, you know, I don't like that person, or I just don't feel they'd be right for them, because it's not, they've passed everything on the even keel, even standing employment requirements. So I've also, a new employee should have the right to begin their benefits, to have medical, and to get right in, and we want to get them so we don't lose them. This happens a lot in police departments and sheriff's departments. If you pay lower, you know, if there's any lapse time, they might jump. And also, you know, as I said, when people leave in the summer. But this would be good, and personally, we've had this with, you know, my child with an anatomy class, and that we had to wait 3 weeks, and the kids, it's the end of the first quarter, and there's nothing going on, and there's different subs every day, and it's just a lot of chaos, whereas you could put somebody in the position right away. So I'm all for it. But I will want to say, and I've talked about this before, and this would be great for today, if you could, between now and tonight, maybe put something on the website, for an amendment maybe, or a place on the website we've talked about with this employee that Mr. Green just mentioned you'd be hiring. It's just covering more bases of transparency. So I'd like that kind of be, if we have these things, make sure we put them on the website as well.
You had mentioned that before, and our goal is to put an amendment, like there's already been personnel, there'll be a new amendment, and it'll have that person highlighted in yellow as an amendment
For tonight.
for tonight.
Justice.
Yes, sir. I think this is great. We know that consistency and the relationship building in the classroom is so important, so the sooner we can get a teacher in that classroom established and working with the students is better. So, you know, I support this wholeheartedly.
John.
Just when we were talking about a long-term sub being cleared and then given full-time or permanent status, if you will, or annual contract, I should say, it's not permanent. I just wanted to be clear so that nobody leaves this meeting with any sort of misunderstanding. Our long-term subs have already been cleared from a safety and standpoint, right? Okay.
And if it was somebody who had not gone through the process for some reason, they were a different sub or whatever, they'd still go through our entire process if they hadn't. So they would be vetted one way or another. They would have already cleared, or we would clear them before we would hire them.
So this would make it even faster, so that when the administration had made a determination to offer a contract of sorts, an annual contract, then it could immediately happen provisionally, and then.
Yeah, this case at our school could be from November 8th, and there was work done well before that. That was just first through December 12th could be the period of time. So it could be a long time, and you lose those good candidates.
Bruce, thank you. I just want to make sure that these employees that are going to be, we're going to hire them today, and they're going to get approved in 3 weeks, that they understand if, for any reason, if they got turned down, that they will not be employed by the district.
Yes,
Now, that's a major problem, because this guy's in charge of, you know, the employees and all that good stuff, but I just want to make sure that there are no surprises for that employee that may not have a job in 3 weeks.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm implementing in HR this year is we're going to be giving them their contract right when they come in instead of in batches as part of an onboarding checklist. So we're already implementing that, and we're going to work with Ms. Diagresta to have language given to them right when they come in, that clearly, and that'll check off right on the onboarding checklist that they've received that information.
I think it's a great program. I'm glad to see it, and it's used in other districts, I think.
Correct, yes.
Okay, good.
So just do want to point out to the board and for the general audience, we're proposing this language be added to the 3,000 series, which is instructional personnel, and the 4,000 series, which is support personnel. We at this time are not proposing that it be added to the 1,000 series, which is administrative personnel. We don't typically have as much turnover in the administrative ranks. We usually have a lead time and that kind of thing. It usually takes us longer to find the right person and that kind of thing. So, we're not proposing adding it to the 1,000 series at this time. They would still have to go through the full approval process by the board before beginning work.
I think we ought to have one policy. If it's good for the administrators, it's good for the teachers, it's good for CWA, why have two different policies?
Mr. Susan? We'll ask, my thought on that would be if someone's being changed administratively, it is already somebody in the system and past. It's that, do we want this person from, let's say, Beachland to Storm Grove to whatever? And those, am I correct? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
No, basically what we're talking about is the administrative hires, anybody in the 1,000 level, so assistant principal on up, basically still would have to wait for board approval before they could begin.
Well, I would be hoping that they would, that's always my hope, that they come from within. So they're still within the system. So, and again, I mean, I agree with you, that's not a problem, but,
So just
I'll listen to what consensus is, but
Right.
why did you leave that out? That would be my question.
Oh, because most of the time when we talk about holding things up that are going to impact children immediately, it's a classroom teacher or it's a support staff employee. We usually have a longer lead time on, leadership vacancies. We see them usually ahead of time, and, we can plan for those and that kind of thing. It wouldn't be a problem to have it in the 1,000 series. It would make, the hiring process much easier and smoother. And again, if we had a change in leadership in the middle of the year or something like that, we would be able to place the new principal or assistant principal in place sooner if we didn't have to wait for board approval.
With the same caveat that if
Absolutely,
they didn't get
yes,
approved,
sir.
they didn't have a job.
Yes, sir. Yeah, with the same pre-employment sheet.
If it makes it smoother and easier and better for everybody concerned, we just need one policy.
I'm just,
I see it a little differently.
Passed over him.
I feel like it opens up a little bit of unnecessary risk, and in my conversations with the superintendent, and kind of just observing the district and how it behaves and operates over the last few years, the superintendent kind of knows how his squad is working out on the administrative side. So he has a bit of time. It's usually going to happen in July, so it's not, really, they should be in their schools probably in June. If there are changes made. So it's less of an emergent issue. I certainly, I like the idea of one policy for everyone. I also see how it could be a situation where, we have to think beyond our current terms and our current superintendent, where there may be a time where there's a new board and a new superintendent who wants to just move a bunch of administrators around. And I know that every time we move administrators around, it always has analysis of sorts in different areas. So I think that this is one of those where the superintendent has thought this through. It seems like he doesn't necessarily need this one. So for that reason,
It's good that we can disagree, Sean.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Mr. Frost. I think that there's obviously reasons why this was done this way, and I do agree with your reasoning about it. I think that I like the fact that in reviewing the board policy that the board continues to have some amount of control over that administrative hiring process. I think it's respectful, and so I would support having the two different policies for the two different groups of people.
I think we have the same amount of control, whether we have the same policy for all of us or not. But anyway, you two.
no, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree that
Fine,
I
that's
do like the fact that we're really vetting out and looking at our supervisors, our administrators, and we're taking more time to put these people in place. Then, so I fully support keeping it separate.
Anything else? Go ahead, Mark.
All right, thank you, sir. So that takes care of the first 5 policy revisions on your spreadsheet. The sixth one, 7100, if you could turn to the 7000 tab in your binder, flip all the way back to there. This is again in response to our pursuit for unitary status. We want to make sure that we go ahead and memorialize or put in policy some practices that we already have in place. Basically, the language there in green, and I won't read it in the interest of time, is basically stating that, you know, whenever we need to build a new building or renovate an existing building, we're going to make sure that the facilities are equitable all across the district. Equitable in terms of geography, equitable in terms of access to different income levels and groups of people from different neighborhoods and that kind of thing. Basically saying that when we develop our 5-year capital plan, that's also memorialized in here, that the 5-year capital plan will include provisions to make sure that we're building and maintaining equitable facilities all across the district. Also, there is a provision in here about the 5-year capital plan that is a little bit more, puts in policy what we've been doing in practice. Again, a step that we bring the 5-year capital plan to the board for approval, for discussion, public hearing and that kind of thing, but it's memorialized in policy in a way that it wasn't in the past. So this policy revision to me is something we've already been doing, but we're just putting it in policy in language so that we're bound to follow these practices.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Justice.
I just want to say that I think it's a credit to the district that we are putting these things into policy, because as we are going for partial unitary status, I think it's important to note that we are making sure that any concerns that anyone might have had about somehow not continuing our commitment to facilities or to any equity across the district, that we're making sure that we are putting that into policy is fantastic. Also, the 5-year capital plan with coming before the board, you know, we are all representative of all districts, but we all kind of have our own understanding of that district that you represent. So, for example, Ms. Simchek from up in Sebastian, or me. So we all kind of bring something else to it, and some perspective maybe of, you know, our constituents from that specific area. So that's also very important and great to have in board policy.
Anything else? John?
Thank you. The red strike through that we're removing, all the flexibility language, if you will, is that because that flexibility has expired in legislation, or it's just something this board, I know historically, I don't think we've chosen to adopt any of the flexibility in construction methodology. So are we just striking that because it no longer applies, or it's something this board is no longer, or has never been interested in?
I'll defer to Ms. DeAgresta as far as whether it's still allowable in statute.
I think it is.
Yes, sir, it is still allowed. It's my understanding that the board has not previously wanted to put the statutory language in policy. You have the ability to do this, even if you don't have a policy. You just must follow the statutory steps of, we have to have a resolution, we have to have a public hearing, we have to give our details of why, and that it's as safe as the prior SREF standard. So you don't have to have it in policy, and so the decision was made not to actually put it in a policy, so that's why it's all struck through.
Okay, I think I understand now. These are possible edits from Neola.
Yes, sir.
And we have decided not to adopt these.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
You can still do this if you wish. We just follow the statutory steps.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so that takes care of the 6th proposed policy revision. We're going to move to the 7th, which is 1121.01, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Rendell. So 1121.01 are some changes to the criminal background and employment history checks. This will also take care of 3121.01 and 4121.01, which will be exactly the same. There are some minor changes, just clarifying the background check and employment of individuals, whether they are or with students or not. If they do not pass certain background checks, we can find them ineligible for hire, as well as adding to the definition of conviction a adjudication of delinquency of a juvenile as defined in statute. That's a suggestion from Neola. And later under the appeal section, there's a section there that kind of really describes what is a procedure of a committee to do an appeal. And rather than changing having to come back and change the policy every time the names on this committee change or how we do the appeal process, this appeal will be moved into the procedure section. And those are the only 3 changes to 112101, 312101, and 412101. It's administrative, instructional, and support.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes.
Question,
Thank you.
I know we're going with policy and what we want, but could you just tell me on, because things like this happen, people take break in service, and then they come back, and I see that it's clearly in policy. Now, is HR using the inkless fingerprints? How are we getting our fingerprints?
They do come in and do it on the scanner.
Okay, on the scanner.
Uh-huh.
And so if somebody is
If they
let's say
have a-
somebody retired and they come back to work. I mean, somebody could be arrested, be employed, be arrested and not tell us. I mean, there is just problematic, things, but re-entering, I see that it's in policy right here. So when they come in and they go through that exact same scanning,
Yes.
inkless process.
Yep, if there's a break in service, and we've had that with an example of a teacher who left and then became a substitute for a while and had a break in service and then wanted to come back and teach later, that now they're being rehired and we put them through the criminal background check. It changes, just like the Raptor system, you come and you check every time. We check every time there's a new employment. If there's a break in service, they do the fingerprinting.
But we don't ever go back and just do a spot check. Probably can't do that legally.
Like a drug test.
Well, I mean, that's, people change, good people go bad, I mean.
Mr. Searcy, every 5 years, there's a cycle. Every 5 years, all employees are rescreened. So every 5 years, you get an updated report on all employees that are fingerprinted. And also, if the school district is the entity that took the fingerprints and submitted them to be reviewed through the FBI and FDLE databases, if a new arrest or a new conviction is reported through that database, the individual who monitors that database for the district will get a report that says these employees have new information.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can go in and look and review.
We do.
Yes.
We do spot check.
And I just completed my level 4 criminal justice FBI background training and my 1-hour test last Thursday because in the HR department, I have access to or could come across that information. So our technology staff that work on those computers have to go through that training. I had to go through the training. We keep that data very secure, and we have to go through certain background clearances and checks to be able to access it, and we do get alerts. Nikki Blanton is our fingerprint specialist.
Mr. Susie? So I feel this is so very healthy, just it's something that I think is important with what's going on in the world and especially with the relationship of adults to children. So I'm very glad to hear that. I also know that we have, that's what I'm going to ask because I know I'm going to get it wrong, that if a teacher has been arrested, it is their duty, no matter whether it's shoplifting or anything, to report the arrest to this district. What I'm not remembering is, will that become, if it is non-reported to the district, is that a fireable offense? Or is it a, finable slap on the hand, whether it's a misdemeanor versus felony versus whatever? Please refresh my memory.
Yes, there is a specific State Board of Education rule that requires all instructional employees to report arrests within 24 hours to their supervisor. So, or it might be 48. I might have it's either 24 or 48 hours. Once the district becomes aware of that and the timeline has lapsed for that report to occur, that is something that the employee can be disciplined up to and including termination.
And obviously, an arrest is not a conviction, so we must be mindful of that.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
if there is a conviction of a misdemeanor, is that a fireable offense? Or is it just felony?
You go back to the policy that we just reviewed. What is it?
It's right, I have it.
A misdemeanor is a
Third one.
category 5, which
Okay.
gives us flexibility.
Okay.
There are 5 categories. They're listed on the criminal background check, and it kind of, that's our definition, puts them in different categories. If it were a felony, that'd be a category A, and that would be,
So the categories for hiring is the same for ongoing employment.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's employment or retention of the person.
Thank you.
Do they have to notify us if they've been arrested or convicted?
Arrested.
Self-reporting.
Okay.
Is
Yes.
Did I understand that correctly, that only instructional staff has to report?
There's a State Board of Education rule specific with regard to instructional staff, but this board's policy that you've adopted applies it across all employment categories.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Mr. Green, 1129.
Okay, 1129, we actually asked Neola to change this one. This wasn't in their policy of updates. Back in, I believe it was December of 2014, the Education Department of General Administrative Regulations, often called EDGAR, had a major update to Title 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations that addressed a lot of stuff around federal grant awards. And this policy was changed back then, and if you'll notice the one area we've added, there was a sentence that said employees may neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or party to subcontracts. Because there's a space between the paragraph above, we've had some interpretation as, oh, does that stand on its own? It's supposed to go with the paragraph above in reference to the award of a federal grant. So we've added just in support of a federal grant or award to clarify that sentence, because there's a plethora of gifting policies and rules. For board members, there's ones. If it's E-rate, there's a different one. If you're a RIPE or a reporting individual, there's a different set. There's a variety of set of statutes and rules around gifting. But this, if it was the sentence stood on its own, basically prohibits it altogether, and it was only intended if it's a contractor or a subcontractor of a federally awarded grant, and it was part of the EDGAR update. So we worked with Neola. They said absolutely it goes with the paragraph above, but to be clear, it would be better to, make that clear in the sentence. So that is in 1129, 3129, and 4129, all three employment sections.
Sure.
I'm trying to find that. So what, let me make sure I understand this. So the way it is now, no one can accept gratuities, any type of gifts as a district employee, but we're going to change it to say only.
So this sentence was intended to be if that's from a contractor that was awarded a federal grant, then absolutely nothing. So you might be able to accept a $25 gift in your role as an employee. If it's a contractor that's working through a federal grant, that is not allowed. But if it's not through a federal grant, there are, small valued items from a vendor or a contractor that this sentence would pose conflict with, and it's designed to only be through federal grants. So all the other gifting policies would apply to everyone else, but this would limit anything of monetary value from a contractor awarded through a federal grant.
So going
Go ahead, you got it.
Going back to the other gifting policies that we have, so you're saying that we do allow our employees to take gifts, and is that not right, Mr. Morrison? We don't take, none of our employees are allowed to accept gifts or perks or free trips or tickets.
So gifts is a broad, if you're talking about sponsoring a lunch for a department, there's a lot of things that go into gifts. And I'll defer to Ms. DiAgresta, but there's a variety of gifting allowances under statute depending on your employee status. For example, I'm a reporting individual. I have budget authority, although it doesn't until it gets signed off everywhere else. I have budget authority. I supervise people. I'm what's called a reporting individual. My limit is $100. Anything over $100, I can't. That's just any reporting individuals. Our principals, most of our administrators that have budget access and terms, there's a $100 limit you can't accept. If it's under $100, under between 50 and 100, there's another rule. I believe board members, there might be a $50 gifting limit. So those limits apply.
across the board?
Well, they apply depending on what employee group you're in. My employees are not reporting individuals, they don't have that limit. So they might have, if it's E-rate, it's $50, but there's a series of gifting laws that apply, but they're unique to you. Some people have more stringent, such as the board, it's not 100, it's 50. When I believe that's in statute.
Just to piggyback off Bruce, Mr. Green, that's why I was shaking my head. For the purchasing department, we've actually gone more restrictive than that. No employee whatsoever in the purchasing department may accept any gift whatsoever. Because we're the front lines dealing with the vendors, and we feel that it's inappropriate for anyone, particularly in that department, to be accepting any gifts.
And I appreciate that. That's what I would hope that we would do across the board, is not even cloud the situation and accept gifts. And if there were any gifts that were accepted, I would like to have that reported, have a recording that I accepted this gift, just so we always just stay very transparent with this, because I always have a concern that when contracts are brought to us as board members, I want to make sure that those contracts are brought to us because they are the best contract, not because one vendor might have a better relationship with whoever it is bringing it to us. So I just want to, that's why I was asking for clarity, to make sure that our employees know this policy.
Yeah, we've actually had some internal discussions about having some training on gifts and the various levels.
And I was going to jump in, and I'm sure there's a Florida, I'm not sure, I know there is a Florida, Florida statute regarding that, and I know that Mr. Morrison's department, but it's even as cloudy, but you can clear, like, you don't think like this, but a vendor could bring in, let's say, at Christmas, they bring in like a box of cookies. As long as those cookies are placed in purchasing for every purchasing officer and it's not me and I'm viewing, you know what I'm saying? So I know that that's usually governments, and I know the county has it too. So does the sheriff's department, as well as Mr. Morrison follows those statutes as well. So when you say you don't accept anything, that's like,
the situation that you would want to avoid is quid pro quo, where that particular gift is for the benefit of the particular employee for, in return, some other services or promise of future business. That is not allowable no matter what the value is.
I do have, when somebody is sitting on the evaluation committee, because I've seen those point systems, but are all of your evaluation committee signing off of conflict of interest or no conflict of interest?
Yes, I believe that's part of the packet that they
Okay,
receive,
perfect.
and they receive
Then
the
we're all good.
evaluation documents.
And so that would be, and what I'm saying is, if I'm sitting as one of the 5 members grading who's going to get the contract for, architectural or a building or something, then each one of them are signing off that they don't have any relationship with them as well. And
They
that's
get
really
that.
what I think, to your point, your valid point, is important, that we can boast that.
Sure.
Well, I also, there needs to be a clarity that not only does this apply to the employee, but that vendor can't say to the spouse or, give this to your children, like the same rules that we apply by, they're in place for a reason. And I'm hoping that this is also something that our employees understand, that they can't accept gifts, their spouses can't accept gifts, or their children, to make sure that they understand that. And I'm talking vague here, but being a board member, I hear things, and I just want to make sure that the policy is clear.
Do department heads go over these rules with their employees on any kind of regular basis?
Annual ethics training?
We do have an annual ethics training that actually we're working on determining which system or training we're going to deliver. We've had a lot of conversation on that, and we do meet administratively and train. We I would say for a lot of these policies, some of them we do every year, like sexual harassment we have to do every year. There's certain ones that we do every year, and other ones we do sporadically. I mean, if you tried to train on every one of these board policies, you couldn't do it, but every administrator's meeting, we are presenting from all 4 of our areas various updates to administrators on policies or statutes or regulations that they have to follow. And gifting is one we're having a lot of conversations about how to actually do that. Our current ethics training that we're reviewing talks about gifting, and that's why we're kind of pausing a little bit, because it talks about, oh, well, a $25 gift may be okay. So we're reviewing the content to make sure it aligns with our board policies.
As long as it trickles down to the employees who would be affected by this, that's the important thing, I think, Bruce. Any other questions?
So that does take care of 3129 and 4129 too. The exact same changes are there. So the next change actually jumps to 7540 in the technology section. Neola actually brought a lot of changes to this, but those changes were repealed this summer as the digital classroom plan is no longer required in statute. We still get our funding. This is policy 7540. If you go to the 7000s tab, I believe it's the 3rd policy in, 7540 technology. So really there's only some minor changes here. It just talks about students may be limited in their access if they violate the student responsible use policy, and whether they need access to curriculum or online assessment. We might limit some of their other use. They might have digital curriculum they have to access, but they might not be able to do other things if they violate the policy. And we just, it already in the middle has capital superintendent, which means superintendent or designee, so we took out a title, which was an old title, and we've tried to limit titles in here because they change so often. And that's really the only changes in this particular policy. Some minor language changes. Seeing no questions. The next one is 8340 letters of reference, and actually Neola did an entire overhaul of this policy based on ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. So the letters of references, it now just clearly says that we can provide a letter of reference, and the board might do it, an employee might do it, and if it's in good faith, you know, you're not to be held liable for that. But if you are found to be untruthful, or you knew something and you didn't report it, then you could be liable for that. And clarifying that we cannot aid or abet someone who's had allegations of sexual misconduct, and it goes on to clarify unless they've been completely reported properly, investigated properly, cleared properly, and there's no findings to it. So it's just kind of really clarifying some things around letters of reference and when we can provide them and when we can't. For someone who leaves here and wants employment somewhere else, and they ask us for a letter of reference.
Yeah, I'm going to say, wow, thank God. We don't, this is something that, this is typical Neola, and it's, you know, we get a set of things that updates. I want the public to know, nothing like this. I mean, there's like, I've been here for a few years. This doesn't cross our path, but this is just, so it's just, was a bubble in a cloud out there. I wanted to say it's.
We're finally going to stop giving letters of recommendation to sexual harassers.
Finally.
A lawsuit happened somewhere,
It's in
so
the
I'm sure they
zeitgeist.
update.
Yeah.
And so that's all of the policies, Dr. Rendell, under my particular section.
Any last questions for Bruce? All right, move on to 6325, Mr. Morrison.
Yes, sir. 6325 has been revised. If it's under the 6000s tab. It's actually the first one in your packet. And the change is that the district shall take affirmative steps to assure that minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible in accordance with Code of Federal Regulations 200.321, which is from the Uniform Grant Guidance. When I read this, one of the first things I did is ask Mr. Carver, how are we going to do this? So he explained to me that we have a national database for procurement called DemandStar. And that is the database in which the minority businesses, the women business enterprises are self-identified within that system when we put out the requests for bidding. We put it through that system. The labor surplus area firms is actually a list that is maintained by the Department of Labor, and Indian River County is on that list. So again, we would make sure that we take affirmative steps to ensure that these counties are, all, when we put out our RFP through that demand star, it also picks up those, because it goes nationwide. So that is an update that is based on the Code of Federal Regulations for federal grants. Any questions? Okay. The next policy is 6490, and it talks about and clarifies the circumstances within which the school board provides legal services for employees, officers, and board members, primarily based on any action arising on and in the course of the performance of their assigned duties and responsibilities. So as typical, the Neola firm, they provide various options based on statutory language. We chose not to tie the board's hand and select shall. So if you look at option 1, for example, it says we shall provide legal services, but option 2 talks about may. So if there is a petition to the school board, the board can consider that and not be handcuffed into having to provide legal or reimburse for legal services for employees out of the course of, when something happens based on the course of their assigned duties.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is my second time we've done this officially on an annual basis. So when this is coming before the board, this is board policy, and that's part of the things that we're responsible for as policy. So this is coming to us as a recommendation that we go with option 2, because it's not really, are you asking us?
I think it's staff recommendation at this point.
Okay.
So if we got different direction from the board, then we would take a different direction.
So I don't disagree with this, but I'm just saying, if for some reason I liked option 1 better as a board member, then this would be the point at which I would say this strike-through red area that I shouldn't like, which I'm being told not to like, I'd have to take the stand now to mention that I like it and that okay. I just
Yes,
want to
ma'am.
make
This
sure I
wouldn't be your only opportunity. Again, this is the workshop where we're sharing information. This would have to go, all policy changes go for public hearing, correct? And up for board approval. So this isn't the only stop, but this would be one of the stops where you could say, you know what, I disagree with this recommendation from staff, and then we'd look kind of for direction or consensus from the board, and we would react to that.
And we have made those, and what would happen is then we would pen change even a small word or a whole paragraph, cut and paste, and so then when this is moved to an action item, those edits will come through that we make. So by all means, if you see something.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, this is when there are options like this, should it be presented to the board where you have an option here, this is our recommendation, but not that it's stricken and
In red.
in red,
That would be the best
I
part.
respect the recommendation, and I happen to agree with this, but there may be an instance when I don't. So perhaps in the future, I don't know if any other board members feel that way, but if there's an option there available to us, perhaps we should be given the ability to.
Now would be the best time to change, because if you were to change that at the board hearing where we just had the public hearing, and you decide to change, then we've got to go back, I believe, and have another public hearing, re-advertise, do the whole shooting match. So now is the perfect time, if that were something you wanted to do.
Do you see anything else?
We can always vote it down when it comes up. It's better to shape it right the first time, if we can, I think. Any other questions?
Okay, Mr. Morrison, your next.
Thank you. The next policy is 6685. It has been revised to clarify that no expenditure of general K-12 funds shall be made for purchases that are not directly related to students. Over time, there has been a slew of Attorney General opinions as to what is appropriate expenditure of school board funds. There has been the confirmation of home rule powers on the school board, et cetera. This clarifies that the board prohibits the expenditure of K-12 funds for any purchases that are not directly related to students, and any expenditure of board funds must be authorized by law. So that is putting some clarity around that. The items in the subsection with the X's are already in your current policy.
This speaks to the rental, is that like with the church, like using the facility?
No.
Okay.
And help me out here, Mr. Gressa, there have been cases in the past, for example, where the superintendent of schools wanted the school board to help pay for his doctorate, something like that. There have been cases in the past where a superintendent wanted to be reimbursed for, I think it was the use of his personal vehicle, things of that nature. So this kind of brings it down to the classroom level.
I'm a little confused by the heading of funding for promotion, public relations, and hospitality. Well, I guess that's what is included, not what is excluded.
Correct.
Got it, okay. So those are all, so we don't have any issues with our PIO coming from this? Okay, got it.
The next, I'm sorry. Oh, the next policy is 7310. It's in your 7,000 tab. It's about the third page or so in. And what this does on page 2 of 2 is to codify or put in policy that we have to offer our charter schools surplus equipment or any surplus item in the same way in which we offer our traditional public schools.
So there'll be no charge.
No charge. And there are some other clarifications around here. For example, the charter school shall agree to reasonable maintenance provisions. They shall not dispose of it without prior approval, things of that nature. But it really addresses the offering of that surplus equipment or property, I should say.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have, but I would want to be very clear, do we have some sort of form, it might be in policy, but in our policy, but at the time of the transaction or gift or donation or share, is there a form that says as is?
I'm not sure of that. I believe there is one, but I'd have to verify that.
I just would want to make
'cause
sure that was it.
I do know that the charter schools do come to the warehouse and they get surplus furniture, but I'm not sure if there's a transfer of custody form. I think there is, but I'd want to verify that.
To do
before I
that.
say
I'm glad that we do that, but I would want to make sure that it's an as-is, you know, without, whether it's, yeah.
Right, and since this has the stipulation that they can't dispose of it without first informing the district, also make sure that that's part of.
On the form.
Yeah.
Okay.
They could go to the warehouse and get all those desks we have over there and have a big garage sale.
They do. They do come.
No, but then have a big garage sale. That's
Oh.
what I'm saying.
Set up an eBay account, you know, discount ed stuff.
Okay. Any
No,
questions?
we're not going to say that they're doing that, but we're just making it, we want to help and we want them to comply, that's all.
Well, since it's in our policy, it should be communicated
Yes.
to the partners.
It's not doing anybody any good in a warehouse.
Right.
Period, so. Any other questions? You sure, Mrs. Orr? Look like you're thinking.
No, I'm happy to be able to give the surplus to the charters, because I know that was a issue a few years back, whenever they needed a few desks and nobody would even return an email to them, so I appreciate this. But I do appreciate some of the parameters you had suggested too.
You have a question? Clark?
And the final one is parent organization, booster clubs, and other fundraising activity. The recommendation by Neola is to repeal 9210, and the 9211 is found under your 9,000 tab. It's the first one in. And it talks about the parental organizations, that the prior approval, any new parent organization desiring to use the name of the offices or district must obtain approval of the superintendent as a requisite to organizing. Then it sets out general principles down in the second paragraph regarding, for example, the board will not tolerate any undue pressure, harassment, or intimidation designed to coerce parents or teachers into a membership in one organization as opposed to the other. It lays out those general principles, and I believe it just cleans up some language on page 2 of 3.
Excuse me, we
And
don't have that in our books.
It's in 8,000 for some reason.
It's in the
Mine
8,000.
does.
8,000,
Oh.
thank you.
There's a tab that says 9,000.
Check there. It was in the app portion of the 8,000 tabs.
Probably the
Smart
last two
thinking,
pages
thinking.
that you
Yeah,
have.
9210.
So, Mrs. Justice, to your point, there were two options in this one. We chose option 2 to recommend to the school board, as it maintains the flexibility of the principal to waive the competitive food service sale requirement that is actually in your current policy.
Thank you.
Sorry, I missed that.
So if you go to page 2 of 3, page 2
Sorry,
of
we're
3.
looking for the page.
I'm sorry. Let me
Okay.
know when you're there.
Say that again.
So on page 2 of 3, there's an option 1 that is struck through in red,
Okay.
and then there's an option 2, which we are recommending. And the difference between the two is the competitive sale, the standards where it says, for any fundraisers by a student club and organization, parent groups, or booster clubs that involve the sale to students of food items and/or beverages that will be consumed on campus, the food and beverages items to be sold shall comply with the USDA standards for National School Lunch Breakfast Programs, USDA Smart Snacks, et cetera. We struck that because down in the option that we selected, in the 4th sentence down, it says, unless the principal grants an exception to this requirement pursuant to the Florida Administrative Code 5P1.03. That's the difference between those two sentences.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, so for example, if they were having a carnival and they wanted to sell cotton candy, and that's not something that was approved, that was not something
You could
approved
grant-
by,
they
but
could
the
grant a
principal
waiver.
could say, we're gonna let, okay.
And I believe it's capped on the amount of times that the principal may give this waiver on an annual basis
It's a
Might have to
in the current policy.
waiver, yeah.
But do the police come out and shut
That
down
would
the
be up to
candy?
Mr. McCarty to
Cotton candy police.
police
Cotton
that.
candy police from, I'm not going to say where.
Okay,
That takes care of Mr. Morrison's policies. Ms. Stampier, I believe you have. Oh, Mr. Teskey first, sorry. John, didn't mean to exclude you.
Yeah, no problem, sir.
Get that bright yellow shirt, I'm not sure how I could.
Representing my alma mater, Citrus. So unfortunately, our language was accidentally left out of the binder, so Mrs. Davis is making copies of that right now. I'm pretty confident that I can speak through it with Elizabeth's help, or if we'd like to wait till the
Why don't we
copies are
jump to
made.
Pam's? We'll jump
Okay.
to Mrs. Stampier and then come back.
Good afternoon. If you turn to your binder, section 5,000, policy number 5111.01 and 5111.03 go hand in hand. 5111.01 is homeless students, and it's a replacement policy due to the amendments to the McKinney-Vento homeless. We are required, we have new requirements mandated by ESSA, and this reorganizes the content. So we did an overhaul of this policy to make sure that we were eliminating barriers for our students, for homeless students, as well as for our foster care students, making sure that there are no barriers, there's transportation provided, and we have procedures in place to welcome these students and make sure that they have what they need to be successful. So those are the two policies. Any questions on? Yes.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Okay, being that you mentioned transportation, foster care, or homeless, what if the foster care student is at a charter? Do we provide the transportation for the charter?
It does not say charter, but it says the district shall promptly provide homeless students with transportation services that are comparable to those available to non-homeless students. Do we? Yes, yes, we do. We do provide it for the charter school.
Do we have that in our policy, though?
It's not listed in here. It's not listed in here. Neola didn't recommend it.
And I have a problem with that.
It's considered, our homeless liaison, Mrs. Alice Blanco, says it's because it's considered a public school. But it's not specifically listed in here that says the charter.
we need to list it then.
If charters are public schools.
But what I said,
It's not
as
listed
far
in
as you
policy.
asking, was it specifically
Okay.
listed in here?
Simply.
So, it says comparable to non-homeless. And if we have I'm sorry, let me get my glasses on. Comparable to, please find that, will provide transportation.
The district shall promptly provide homeless students with transportation services that are comparable to those available to non-homeless
Thanks.
students.
So comparable to non-homeless is not providing bus transportation. So you're telling me we're doing something extra?
Well,
Not policy, but through process, we're doing what we're doing in place.
I know that we have a contact person that is working with the homeless as well as our foster care parents or contacts to make sure that we're providing transportation within a 72-hour period.
So I am glad, and that's nice that we do that, but I wouldn't want it in policy that to be opposite, because then we'll be providing, then when it'll be non-homeless, then it'll be, why are you giving one for the other? It starts doing that. I'm glad that we're doing that, but it is extra. And we have already talked about limited transportation. We've also talked about schools of choice going to St. Lucie and over St. Lines. If we start we can't even pay for the transportation that we are not funded correctly within the school district. If we start paying for providing somebody transportation from Oslo to Brevard, or from Sebastian to St. Lucie, or I want to go to Orlando every day because my dad lives in Orlando but my mom lives here, we just can't pay for all that. So I just want to make sure that the niceties of life that I think that are expected, I just don't want to put in policy. So I'm glad that you said that we are providing that. So that is what we're supposed to do.
We are providing.
But if there's something different, I don't want to say, I don't want to know about it. I'm glad that we're doing that, but it can't be policy that we're going to reverse and start this long, open the door for St. Lucie transportation, Brevard transportation, up, down, left, right. In fact, we have Sebastian Charter Junior High pay for their busing through us. And I was asked by somebody, why doesn't Indian River, the Charter High School, provide that? I said, why don't they pay for it? So, that you'd have to talk to that school.
Mr. Chair, Ms. DeAgresta.
Thank you. As Ms. Simchek mentioned, some of our charter schools do have contracts with the school board with regard to the provision of transportation for their students. So with regard to those particular charter schools, that any bus transportation provided to students who may be in foster care or are in our homeless population, the charter schools would then include them on their list and they would be paying for those services. So that aspect, there'll be some reimbursement as needed for those students.
So that's great. I think you just clarified it.
Absolutely. But you've raised a good point about students who may cross county lines. And that is always a challenge because we do have some families who will from time to time have to cross county lines with regard to the McKinney-Vento homeless federal statute. And what that tells us is that we have to reach some sort of an agreement with our neighboring school district. And we have to reach some sort of a plan, and it's probably going to be on a student-by-student basis depending upon the circumstances. I've been involved in situations where we've agreed to transport a student all the way to the school in the adjoining district, but then there's a reimbursement of those costs from that adjoining district. I've been involved in discussions where we will transport a student to a hub, and then the other district will come and pick up the student from that hub and then transport them the rest of the way. So it is a student-by-student, case-by-case basis, and we always try to work out those financial reimbursements, but you raise a very good point that when we have students in difficult family situations and with our homeless or families in need population, that we try to work those things out. But with regard to charters, specifically, we do have some contracts with them that you approve on an annual basis, and so those contracts would then help to reimburse the district for those expenses. But thank you for the thank you for the question.
Okay. All right, Ms. Dampier, next one.
Policy number 5120 is assignment within a school district. We added verbiage at the end that says assignment to schools or attendance schedules shall discriminate against students. No assignment to schools or attendance schedules shall discriminate against students on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, etc. So those were the areas that we added in for this particular policy. Policy number 50.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Question?
No, I was going to ask, I remember a similar conversation where we said, why are we listing subsections of certain things if we're not listing all subsections underneath all? Mr. Frost, do you remember that conversation?
I do remember that
Okay,
conversation.
so is that something that is still concerning, or?
Yeah, I'd like to see it,
Thank you.
be less specific and still within the law. Because there are, I think, 37 different genders now, or more, just on Facebook alone. So I don't know that we need to specifically spell out any and every single one. But I'd also refer to, right, and also maladies, you know, including HIV, AIDS, or sickle cell. I mean, there's also Tay-Sachs.
Right.
There's also Epstein-Barr and things that, you know, that are specific to certain groups. I think that just saying we don't discriminate on race, color, national origin, sex, everything within parentheses, I think, is extraneous and creates a liability, candidly, that we didn't explicitly say this, or that we have done this but not this group, and things like that. So my preference would be that we get rid of all of the parenthetical statements other than except as authorized by law, because that makes less of liability. Religion, military status, ancestry, genetic information or classes, yeah, because the genetics is going to be a conversation going forward too. So
I support that as well. I would like, I remember in other policy, I believe that we had stricken any of the clauses, we had taken that out. So in this, I would also like us to do that.
What possessed us to put those other things in there, Ms. Dampier?
Well, that was Neola.
Neola.
Yes.
This was Neola's language that they
Language.
suggested.
Can you, I think a suggestion would be to jump from assignment to schools or attendance schedules to not discriminate against students on the base, students on the students which are students in classes protected by the state and federal law. Like jump to the last sentence, like you leave out the whole middle. You can't, okay, attorney says no.
So it's only the specific examples that that would make sense to remove without issue?
Yes, the majority of the language here essentially tracks federal and state law, which when your policies are reviewed, which they're reviewed periodically by both federal and state agencies for equity issues, if you don't have the list of protected categories, you know, race, color, national origin, sex, disability, pregnancy, which is just here in Florida, it's not a federal, marital status, age, just all those protected categories. If we don't have those included in our policies, unfortunately, we will get heavily criticized by the federal and state agencies that review for equity purposes, and they always send a letter telling you to put them in. So I would suggest leaving in the list of protected categories, because every year we're going to get a letter saying we need to put them back in. But you can certainly remove the parenthetical, the examples essentially that are provided, you can remove those. Those I think are just for to assist someone in understanding, but as you said, the laws change. They ebb and they flow as courts interpret, you know, various categories. So we can certainly remove the parentheticals.
I would support that. I think her advice is sound.
Sean, did you say there are 37 different genders?
That's just on Facebook alone that you can choose. Yes, sir.
Where I'm from is only.
I think it's up to 50, actually. I don't have my phone. But it was 37 when we last reviewed this, but now it's 50 or more, I think.
We don't have to list them all in here.
I would hope not. Our policies are going to swell.
Yeah.
But it's all the other things, too, like including HIV, AIDS. I mean, we could say cancer. We could literally go to WebMD, but everything on WebMD is cancer, but if you type in your symptoms. But having that, you know, and I believe Mrs. Simchek has brought this up, of you run the risk of leaving someone out. Absolutely. And the fact is, you know, it's actually more inclusive language to just say that we're not doing on sex or disability. That's it. We're not going to discriminate on those, no matter what that means, and let the courts determine what that means. Not, you know, create a list that may leave someone off.
Ms. DeGresta?
The only parenthetical that I do suggest that we leave in this particular paragraph is the one where we're talking about discrimination on the basis of age, and that parenthetical says except as authorized by law, because there are some provisions which allow an age-based decision, so I do suggest leaving in that parenthetical, please.
Sure. Well, that actually keeps liability less. That's a good edit.
All right, Ms. Tampier, you've got directions?
Clear on that?
No,
No.
I'm sorry. I
We're
didn't
going to
know.
remove the
I'll
parent.
get with you
yeah,
after.
I do.
Suzanne.
I'll get with you after. Policy number
5121?
5121, which is controlled open enrollment. This is a new policy, allows school districts to make student, school assignments using parents' preferential school choice. And what we did, we struck through some areas and added some areas. Do you want me to go through all the sections? We did a presentation earlier, but do you want me to go through? Okay. The first section, we added, once the school has reached 90% program capacity, we struck through as set forth in the Florida Inventory of Schoolhouses, which was formerly FISH. And then we added, for each of the grade levels, our programs offered in that school. And so we struck through once the number of enrolled students in a district school, all of that area. And then we added the capacity, when it refers to capacity, the maximum class size pursuant to Florida statute. And then we struck through class size and added for specified grade levels. The capacity of each public school in the district shall be identified on the district's website, and we listed the website there. And we added the capacity information provided on the website shall be by grade level and or school within the district. Application, and we added and preferential treatment for school choice. Applications to participate in the district's K through 12 controlled open enrollment program should be accepted beginning on March 1st and ending on April 15th of every calendar year. Applications are available online or in person at each school and must be submitted no later than April 15th to student assignment. To participate, to a student assignment coordinator. In person, to participate in the lottery process for the upcoming school year, all applications received after April 15th will be placed on a waiting list until a seat becomes available at choice school. Magnet school applications are accepted beginning December 1st and ending on February 1st of every calendar year. All applications received after April 1st will be placed on a waiting list. And we struck through options. If desired, choose one of the following two options. And then we struck through where it says applicants will be required to identify their primary school of choice in the application, and we struck through including up to alternate choices ranked in order of preference. So we struck through that. And then on page 3 of 8, we struck through number 4 that says students in multiple session schools and added school district employees that work full-time. Phase 2, applicants included in this phase reside in the district but are entitled to no other preferential treatment. Phase 3, applicants included in this phase do not reside in the district but are entitled to preferential treatment in at least one of the following ways, and we identify those ways. And number 4 says school district employees that work full-time. We added that where before it says students in multiple session schools. The lottery will be conducted by struck through 2 or more staff members designated by the superintendent to just include student assignment coordinator. And then the review of the application process, we struck through parts of A, B, C. And then it says, if after submitting an application to participate in the district control open enrollment program and before a decision is made about the application, a student is suspended or expelled, placed on an IEP assigned to a Department of Juvenile Justice, or subject to any alternate assignment as a result of his or her behavior within 10 days, the parent, and we struck through student, shall notify the district by submitting documentation relating to the change in the student's status. So it puts it back on the parent. Then we added, if capacity is reached before all applications can be reviewed and enrollment requests fulfilled. The remaining Phase 1 applications will be maintained on a waiting list in order of lottery number assigned. Until 2 weeks before the first day of school, until the first day of school, and added until applicant ages out of the terminal grade within school. B, Phase 2 applicants residing in the district, we added not entitled to additional preferential treatment. If capacity is available after Phase 1, the district will process applications from applicants residing in the district. We added not entitled to additional preferential treatment. And then we struck through a lot of, you see a lot of red there, and then we added, again, the 10-day. The approved applicants will be notified in writing and shall have 10-day calendars to enroll at the school where he or she has been offered the opportunity to enroll. And all of this is also listed on our website. Page 5 through 8.
Just stand here.
Just one question. The area where we are striking through student and putting parent shall notify the district. As having foster kids, I can already see a problem with having the parent and parent/guardian.
In your policies, in the definition section, which we're not touching today, the definition of parent includes parent, guardian, or anyone acting as in the capacity of a parent when the parent is not otherwise. So that issue is addressed in the definitions section that would encompass all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Page 5 of 8. Oh, I'm sorry again.
I'm sorry,
So
while we
sorry to see-
stopped, underneath the lottery section, it says 2 or more staff members designated by the superintendent. We've only listed one person there. Is there a reason that there would be 2, perhaps a check and balance, or some type of, just to make sure that we're,
Yeah, we probably should be a little more clear on that.
TPI,
Yeah.
person integrity.
Yep,
We can add that.
yeah, we can do that.
Anything else?
I'm sorry, clarify who you're adding. You're accepting the student assignment coordinator? And then who's the second person?
We didn't say it was, we can change the language to say, and at least one other person designated by the superintendent.
Anything else? Ms. Dampier, go ahead.
Just want to make sure I get that right.
Page 5 of 8. We checked if capacity is reached before all applications can be reviewed and enrollment requests fulfilled. The remaining Phase 2 applications will be maintained on a waiting list in order of lottery number assigned. And this was huge this year. We said throughout the year. It used to be until 2 weeks before the first day of school. Until the first day of school, we included it throughout the school year, and that's listed on our website as well. Phase 3, applicants residing outside the district. We added entitled to preferential treatment. And then we struck through a whole section, and then again, we added parents and took out the word student. And then at the bottom of page 5, we added, if capacity is reached before all applications can be reviewed and enrollment requests fulfilled, the remaining Phase 3 applications will be maintained on a waiting list in order of lottery number assigned. Again, we added throughout the year instead of specific times of the year. So it's an ongoing wait list. D, Phase 4, all remaining applicants not entitled to preferential treatment. We struck through a whole area again. We changed parent to, added parent and deleted student. We added here, if a student is reached before, if capacity is reached before all applications can be reviewed and enrollment requests fulfilled, the remaining Phase 4 applications will be maintained on a waiting list in order of lottery number assigned throughout the school year again. So it's not a set period. Appeals, applicants who are not accepted for enrollment may appeal to the it was the superintendent, but we said student assignment coordinator within 10 school days. We deleted calendar days. Appeals are only accepted if the applicant meets a hardship criteria, and we have those outlined. The appeal must be submitted in writing, must be based on hardship, and must include as much detail as possible regarding hardship. Appeals will be considered by the student assignment coordinator, again, and the decision of the student assignment coordinator. Applicants will be notified in writing of the student assignment coordinator's decision.
Is there any, in changing from calendar days to school days, is there any possibility that this appeal might happen in the summer? Or are we just treating school days like work days?
Calendar year,
Okay.
school days.
This is school days.
School days.
Okay, fair enough.
School days, so it wouldn't happen in the summer. It's not
Right.
school days.
So would an appeal ever happen in the summer, I guess is the question, in changing from calendar days to school days?
My question would be, if the lottery begins on April 1st, let me see if I got the timeline, where that would be a moot point, because
Right.
it's not going to bleed into the summer.
Right.
No,
Okay.
Because
they would
it's,
already-
you know what I'm saying?
Got it. I just want to make sure
Shouldn't
that
be
I'm
an
not
issue.
creating a loophole.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Zork?
The area under appeals, the appeals must be submitted in writing, must be based on hardship, and must include as much detail as possible regarding the hardship. Appeals will be considered by student assignment coordinator, and the decision of student assignment coordinator is final. That last one, decision of the student coordinator is final, and that one makes me uncomfortable. I think that if it's how many appeals do we get? Because it makes me uncomfortable to put that responsibility on the student assignment coordinator whenever this is really going to turn into a constituent issue as a board member. I can just see it coming back. So what can we do there to have a final step that would come to you for final review? My question. Because we don't get very many.
No, we don't have any
Right.
this past year.
Ms. Zork, are you finished?
Yeah,
Because I'm going to speak to your point.
okay.
So I think that you have a good point, and the other one that was taken out was superintendent. I know he does a lot, but how many of these appeals are we going to get? And I feel like you're just appealing to the same person. And I don't know if you've given any thought about that. I don't think it's going to add a lot to your calendar. But I do feel that you should have a different court to appeal, and I think you made a good point.
Well, I think that what the process we're trying to outline is the person gets an assignment, and then they appeal that initial assignment to the student assignment coordinator. So that step would still need to stay in place. I think the sentence where the decision of the student assignment coordinator is final is probably not final. I mean, so we probably need to put into place there, in certain cases that may not be the final word, so we could probably wordsmith that to say, decisions could be appealed to the superintendent or something like that.
Semi-final,
Yeah,
quarterfinal,
because I think
playoffs?
when we stop right, we say the appeals would be considered by the student assignment coordinator, period. That's the first step. And then that, we can write something about that decision could be then appealed to the superintendent, something like that.
Well, at some point, it has to be final, though. I mean, there has to be, an appeal, and then that is final, so
And
there needs to be a point at which the
Right.
process ends, and then moves to circuit court, I would guess, right?
Right, I don't know if it's ever final.
But I do like Mrs. Simchuk said, that student assignment coordinator, then I would like to keep in the last sentence, the superintendent is final. And keep you
Oh, I
there.
see.
Yeah,
because-
that's the place to check it.
Because, like they said, they don't get very many, but I can see this coming back as a constituent issue, and I feel that I would want to make sure that you are in final control of that decision.
I agree. So
Leave in superintendent, take out student
Yeah.
assignment
Yeah.
coordinator. right?
Yep.
the superintendent is final, and applicants will be notified in writing of the superintendent's decision in the following line.
Seems to be the consensus of the board, so,
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Done?
go ahead, you got it?
Okay, page 7 of 8. We struck through late filed applications and applications filed after April 16th. This is the process. Applications received after April 16th will be placed on the waiting list in order of the date received. and we struck through all of the other areas. And maintain an appropriate socioeconomic, demographic, and racial balance. We added, the superintendent shall then make the appropriate recommendations to the board. It should be noted that as of blank, we insert the date. There are no racially isolated buildings within the school district. And then we added, the district does not provide transportation to students enrolling under this policy unless otherwise required by state or federal laws. And then the last section, a student who believes good cause exists must submit a written request to principal identifying the facts and circumstances the student believes establishes good cause. The superintendent will consider the written request and make a recommendation to the board during a publicly noticed meeting. And that's it regarding that policy.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to note that a lot of these things are things that we had discussed that were brought to us when we were discussing controlled open enrollment, and and now we're just putting those things into policy. But I think that, I think it went very smoothly, actually. I think that, I know this board took it very seriously in the ideas and the implementation of controlled open enrollment in our district, and I think it went really well, so I just want to say thank you for that. I think it was very thoughtful.
Policy number 551701, bullying and harassment. On page 1 of 9, we added at school bus stop, because before it was at or on a district school bus or at a district school bus stop. So we have to do an investigation. It says pursuant to state law, district parents, teachers, administrators, school staff, and school volunteers, community representatives, and local law enforcement agencies shall be involved in a review of this policy. After the revised policy has been adopted, it should be submitted to the Florida Department of Education. This review process shall be conducted not less than every three years thereafter. So we have an obligation to our school bus stops, not just at our school buildings. So we have to do an investigation.
How far away from the bus stop are?
What is a bus stop?
Yeah.
How do we operationally define a bus stop?
So I know we've discussed this for years as principals under the domain of the jurisdiction of the school, the supervision of the school. I know Mr. Gresta can answer this more in depth, but there's been several court cases that cite from front door to bus stop is under the supervision and control. Other court cases have said just the bus stop. We researched it at a principals meeting several years here in the district, and it's very interpretive in different districts, where the bus stop could be under the jurisdiction, walking to and from could be considered under the command and control of the school. So I know there's been several cases supporting both.
Yeah, we're looking at
Thank you. And Mr. Teskey is correct. Let's start off by saying that during the last, it might have been 2 legislative sessions ago, the wording that's been added to this policy about the school bus stop is in statute. So it has to be in there. Because the statutory revisions are so new, there isn't really any court guidance on how we interpret what a bus stop means. I can share with you that there are court cases involving other school districts where students walking to a bus stop were not under the jurisdiction of the school board, and so if something happened to them, the school board was not liable. There are other court cases that have held that when a student is walking to the bus stop, the school board was responsible for the incident, and so the school board was held liable. So I think the courts are kind of all over the map on this. We'll just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. We don't really have any good judicial guidance on that particular issue or any definition of what a bus stop is.
How's the best way to protect the school district?
To continue training your school bus drivers that if they see something going on at a bus stop, they need to report it immediately.
And don't leave until,
Yes,
I don't know what all goes into that training.
Do not leave the bus stop. If there's a dangerous situation going on, they should maintain the students on their bus and report it, call for backup. Continue to train your employees not to ignore any dangerous situation going on at a bus
Is that
stop.
how we train them now?
I know as, as principals, and this goes into walkers and bikers as well, you know, where does your jurisdiction end with a walker and biker? But we have always expressed that the code of conduct applies to the students from school to front door, so their actions on the way home can be deemed accountable by the code of conduct, you know, minus the kids that go visit friends and play, but to and from, it was discussed that they were still held accountable for their behavior under the code of conduct.
But how are we training our bus drivers? If there's an incident going on and the bus driver takes off, I mean, what should they do? Have we trained them on what to do in that case?
I know some will call they will call dispatch at a minimum. They will call in if there's an incident as they're pulling away. Some will stop, some will,
What's our policy?
I don't believe there is a policy, it's a guideline.
Okay. That's the point, John.
Yeah.
I'm not being argumentative, but
Mr. Searcy, I totally support your thought, and, you know, we're not to put you on the spot and give you time to evaluate that, but I would certainly want it to be universal. If I'm riding on a bus route, and on a different bus route, it's different. I know they all have radios. Does every bus driver have a radio comm to dispatch? The other thing is, you know, same thing as we've talked about teachers and things like that. You know, teachers are not there to break up fights. I strongly, you know, believe that that's what you have resource officers for. However, I would like to see a universal policy as, you know, I wouldn't expect a smaller person. Let's say I was a bus driver and there were two high school boys fighting. It's not my responsibility to get off the bus and break it up. However, I would hope that there would be a universal policy to call dispatch and request them to call the police and sit there and describe the two people. One could be injured, one could, you know, they could, you know, so I wish that, you know, if there's an injury, tell them that you've noticed that there's an injury. I would like to see something, and you know, and it's just, this is so healthy to discuss this, to develop something, and if you could get back to us, because I think it's important that every bus stop is created equal.
So you sparked something. So as far as on the bus, the drivers will call in different codes. So a code red on a bus is different from a code red at a school. There's different color-coded actions that go across the radio for dispatch for a fight or an accident or a medical emergency. So it's not a board policy, but it is a transportation policy that they have in their handbook that they use. That is in place.
So then that instead of a policy, it's a standard operation procedure.
Yes.
You have
Yes, ma'am.
something.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
that makes me feel better. At
Right.
some point, I'd like to know, like, the,
Sure.
you know, the universal codes and things, you can just take a look at that, so that I'm aware if somebody asks me, if a parent asks me, what do we do? I don't know. So if you could give me that standard operation procedure, you know, with how the codes, what they mean, and, just, you know, just a little piece, whatever if you have a handbook, could you put it in
Yes,
my box?
ma'am.
Put it in
Sure.
our box. That would be great.
any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, policy number 5540, the schools and investigations involving students. We added state and federal law enforcement authorities and struck through including the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which was ICE throughout the policy. We deleted that. And then we had every employee with a responsibility in connection with child abuse has reasonable cause to suspect child abuse, what the expectation is as far as reporting it. That was added here specifically. And then on page 2 of 3, if a student in the middle, it says, if a student is to be questioned as a witness or victim in an alleged violation of the law, the principal shall remain in the room during the questioning unless compelling reasons for exclusion are provided by the law enforcement agency. Although in such circumstances, the principal is lawfully acting in loco parentis, the parent should be informed. And that was added in that section. And then it says, before the students are questioned as a witness, we struck through that as a suspect, in an alleged violation of the law, the principal shall attempt to contact the parent prior to questioning and shall remain in the room during the questioning unless compelling reasons for exclusions are provided by law enforcement agency. We added, in the event prior contact was not successful, the parent shall be notified subsequent to the questioning. So that's the obligation of making sure that our parents are notified.
question. So you're saying that the principal will stay in the room if the student's to be questioned as a witness or a victim. I know earlier in this piece, and I know this has been discussed before, the principal will remain in the room during the questioning of a student that's being investigated unless the agency investigator requests the principal to not be present? Is that the? Is that the understanding? Does that hold true for our elementary schools too? Because a child requesting or consenting to the presence of a school staff member, you know, an elementary school student may not know to request to have the principal there. So that's something that
I can just speak from experience at elementary. Sometimes the principal is asked to be in there, and sometimes we're asked to leave if DCF comes in. So sometimes, although we notify the parents, they'll ask us to step out.
Do we, if you have a situation where your student is being investigated and questioned on a crime or whatever you want to call it, shouldn't their parent be in there or a lawyer? I mean, they have the same rights as anybody else, don't they?
Well, I will say due process in general in education is less robust than it could be, and I would certainly want to your point, I would want to make sure that we have the best possible due process in our policy there, and certainly have parents present or things like that.
Well, the principal is the parent if the parent's not there, but I have a problem, or I wanted to ask the attorney, if anybody's a DCF worker, please forgive me, but there's a difference between a DCF worker and a law enforcement officer. And clearly, you know, although that might have been the practice, I have a problem with a DCF worker saying, please, Mr. Teskey, can you get out of the room, as opposed to officer so-and-so saying you'll need to leave. There's a big difference with that in my mind. But that's my mind. The attorney might say legally, Dale, that's a different story. So I would like to hear what she feels about that.
Certainly, and the copy of this policy that I have, this policy is actually in two separate parts, and it's not really clear on this copy. There are big headings in your policy that's online that isn't really reflected here. But like on the first page, about halfway down, and it's not broken out from the rest of the wording, the first page is talking about investigations of child abuse or neglect under the Child Protection Act. Okay, so those are DCF investigations of abuse. So there has been an allegation that the child or a family member of that child is being abused. With those types of investigations, those investigators, depending upon the allegations, depending upon the principal at the school, depending upon the child, may say, absolutely, Mr. Teskey, we want you in the room for this because you're a known person to the child and will help with setting the right tone in the room. Or the investigator may say, the types of questions that we need to ask, we don't want Mr. Teskey in the room, not because we don't think he's a good principal or a good person to have in the room, but we need to ask some very private, personal questions of a child with regard to an allegation of abuse of that child. So that's the one category. And we look to our DCF investigators to kind of guide us as to who needs to be in the room. I've been involved in situations where a DCF investigator has asked to be alone in a room to question a particular child. And if there's any kind of a question, a second guess of is this really the way we need to do it, we've never hesitated to get a DCF supervisor on the phone to talk through, is this the protocol and why? Give us some areas of comfort that this is the protocol to follow with this particular case, and then we talk through it, kind of not the people in the heat of the moment in the room, but administrators talk through it and make a decision as to what's the best way to move forward. Because the other way, if you will, that an investigation could be conducted is the investigator could get a court order and take the child and do the investigation somewhere else. So, you know, we try to have the least amount of interruption for the child, but that's a DCF child abuse investigation, which is kind of like the first page. But over on the second page of this particular policy is a description, and the heading is kind of buried in with the other language, investigations of violations of law by law enforcement agencies. So we've kind of broken it apart because they really are two very different investigations. And when we're dealing with law enforcement investigations, it may be that law enforcement is investigating needs to interview a student who's the victim of a crime, or they may need to interview a student who is alleged to be the perpetrator of a crime. And we also try to divide out those categories. For victims of crimes, we certainly want to cooperate with law enforcement and allow them to get that information. But we need to be careful because we are an educational institution. We don't just hold kids for different agencies to come and pick off as they choose. And law enforcement is usually very good to work with in these situations, but if all they're doing is trying to find that perpetrator, we suggest to law enforcement, you know what, this isn't really a school thing. It didn't happen at our school, doesn't really involve our school. Let's not be the holding cell for this. Let's let this happen at the home or somewhere else. You know, we can help you kind of find a different location and not really do those sorts of things at school. So there's like different categories depending upon the situation the student is under, and that's what this policy is trying to capture, is there's so many different ways that people need to access our students. And so I know they've tried to outline at least some of the parameters of those interviews in this policy.
Yes, ma'am. Justice.
So further to that point, then, I don't see adding in this, if a student is to be questioned as a witness or a victim in an alleged violation of law, and that's specific to DCF or this area of this policy, then is that also being added, or has it been suggested to be added, or does it already exist in the other area, the investigation of a crime or those types of things? Do you understand what I'm asking? I'm sorry, I did not word that well.
With regard to DCF investigations of allegations of abuse, is that the category?
Right, so we're adding in we're adding this in about this piece about the student being questioned as a witness or a victim. The principal shall remain in the room. On the other side of it, when it's not the DCF part, if it's the law enforcement and investigation of a student, is it being added into that area as well, or did it already exist in that area?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It says on page 1 of 3, the principal or designated guidance counselor will remain in the room during questioning of the student unless prohibited by the agency investigation.
Okay, that's not what I'm asking, but that's okay. I mean, I understand that to be the case. Okay, that's fine. I'll look it up.
I'm short.
Okay, 2 areas. I, as a parent, do not feel comfortable having my child questioned or answering questions from law enforcement on any type of investigation without me or a representative being there that I have asked to be there in my place. So that's number one, and I know that concern did come up during the code of conduct because I think this goes into the code of conduct too. Mm-hmm. Secondly, whenever we look at having DCF come in and question a child, whenever, correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, mm-hmm. Whenever a judge asks, there's a court order for an investigation to take place and a judge gets involved, and but at that point, isn't there, it's my understanding there's another party in the room, and it's not just the DCF worker asking the questions if it's court ordered. You have another person in the room with the child, and that child's not left alone answering questions. Is that correct? Whenever it's a court order, from my experience, that's what I remember.
But just the fact of having a court order doesn't necessarily mean there'll be certain categories of people in the room. It's going to be what the allegations are and what the questioning is going to be about. For instance, if it's an allegation of sexual abuse of a child, typically you have someone in the room with the investigator who is trained in working with children and asking questions without leading them. I lead questions. You know, I'm going to ask you a question because I want an answer out of you that I'm going to get out of you. I lead when I question witnesses. But when you interview a child, you have to have someone who's trained to be able to ask questions without actually giving the answer that they're looking for. So depending upon the investigation, the allegations, the questions, or whatever needs to happen, that then tells DCF who needs to be in that room. I've seen court orders where it's just go get the child and take them into custody, protective custody, because for whatever reason there's information that the student's in or the child is in some sort of danger, and so they just go pick them up. Right. And they take them someplace else and they ask whatever questions they're going to ask.
Well, I think where I'm trying to go with that question is
Sure.
I sort of already know the answer to it. If we give authority to DCF to come into the schools and question the child, as a parent, and I know the reasons behind the investigation, but out of protection of that child, I feel that there also needs to be a school representative in that room. If the parent's not there or law enforcement isn't there, I just don't feel comfortable DCF questioning a child on something as severe as that without another person in the room to validate whatever the final report is. So
Without a court order.
without a court order. So that's just my concern. I don't want to set any policy that we give authority to DCF to come in and take the child off by themselves with one person. And also, I don't feel comfortable with if a child's being asked questions or for different reasons, the parent's not there or there's not a representative that the parent asked to be there for that. So that's my opinion.
That's why I raised the question. There. Any other? Yes, Sean?
Thank you, sir. My preference would be to, I see that a witness to or is struck through as one of the possible options for Neola. My preference would be to leave that in or to better understand why we struck through that.
So my suggestion to staff is that we take this policy back, we review it with Ms. DeGresta and maybe some law enforcement officials to make sure that we're not violating any protocols. And take the feedback that was given by the board members into account to see if we need to revise what we move forward.
But I really see where she's saying it's bloody because I'm totally, muddy, because it's totally bloody, muddy. Where, no, I'm looking at the red, that's what I, sorry. A witness to or a suspect in an alleged violation of law is totally different. So it's over here as, and I have a problem, so I'm listening to you, and so, I don't think that we need a parent if I see that we have a policy that says a student is questioned as a witness, the principal, we will call the parent, it says. We will attempt to call the parent. And if not subsequent, we will tell them there was questioning. But if, let's just say there was a rape or there was a kidnap and the safety of that victim is at hand without immediate questioning, and you try to question, you can't get a parent, so I could see where this is conflicting because we're talking of one with DCF for parent abuse, and then we're talking, let's say you have two students and somebody is hidden, or there's a missing link and that officer needs, the quicker to the crime is a quicker chance of resolution. And if you're calling a parent and they can't get down, all bets are off. Your daughter, my daughter, would be at, there might be a problem if there's some sort of.
Our obligation, though, is to take care of that child.
Yes, well, I'm saying the suspect,
And if,
but that's why the suspect is
Great,
different.
But, they may not be, they may be leading with their questions.
No,
And I
no,
want
but that's
somebody
why
else
I'm
in-
saying, right here,
somebody
look,
else in the room.
she was right. This paragraph right here is talking about a crime, where you could have where let's say there was a rape in the school. That has nothing to do with DCF. It was just a fresh rape. An officer comes in, he wants to talk to a suspect who's a student. They try to call the parents know where to be found, and by the way, she's unconscious. You have to be able to talk to the suspect.
And you can
with
also
the
have the principal in the room.
With the principal in the room, yes.
Right. If you-
But it says here that, that's what I'm saying.
If you attempted to call.
Right.
If you attempted to call, you couldn't get them. The principal
Yes.
stays in the room for that. But I think our obligation is to make sure that we do right by that student, whether they committed a crime or whatever. We've got to do right by that student.
So then, getting back, because they're interwoven, getting back to the child abuse thing, is it feasible to have that all DCF investigations will be accompanied by the principal or acting administrator of the school unless there's a court order?
Right, because they may be a suspect is another option, right?
Excuse me?
The administrator may be a suspect, which could also be a reason
Yes,
to
with the caveat
exclude.
that
I don't, yeah.
Think about that, Sean.
I think I would
Check the
feel, after talking
You're
this
right.
out, I think
You're
I
right.
would feel more comfortable with any DC investigation happening on our school premises to be court-ordered, period. Because at that point, we know that everything is going to be followed correctly. So, I mean, this is very serious.
And we have time to, it's not like you've got to, if the DCF investigation you're talking about.
Yes.
We have time to put that together. We don't have to say, oh, we heard about this at noon. At 1 o'clock, we're going to have the DCF investigator in here and get this thing done. You've got time to investigate it. Maybe not a lot of time, but.
But I do have a problem, because what if the child's safety is at stake? Right. I don't want to put a red tape court order, blah, 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 falling through the cracks 3 weeks later. And the only place that they can question if the child is from home to school to home to school. But I do feel that the principal should be or administrator should be in the room.
We do have that in here. I stated that before. It says the principal on page 1 or 3. It says the principal or designated guidance counselor will remain in the room during questioning of the student unless prohibited by the agency investigator.
But they don't have the right to prohibit it if it's not a court order. I'm saying we can make that the right. Some DCF person comes in and says, hey, get out of the room. We have the right to say, get a court order. We're protecting the students. If they can't have their parent or it's about their parent, we're going to act as the parent, which is our job anyway, to act as their parent when they're in our care.
But sometimes, just speaking, a lot of times the kids it could be going on at home, and that person has to has to talk to the child.
No, this is just our feeling.
Okay.
This is just our feeling, am I correct? I mean, it's, we're creating policy and this is our feeling.
Yeah.
Right, so like I said, we'll take this policy back and review it some more, make sure, we take into account the input from the board, talk to law enforcement to see what we need to change before we bring it back.
Any other questions on this particular policy? No.
All right, Mr. Tester, you're up.
All right, good afternoon. Once again, apologize for that language not being in the binder. We're looking at 8,500 revisions to the food service program. We're specifically looking at the language that deals with unpaid meal charges and delinquent debt, specifically bad debt. The revisions that have been suggested by Neola. We have made decisions on most, but we have some questions still about dollar amounts and number of days. But this falls under the USDA issuing a memorandum from last year addressing the school district's options regarding unpaid meal charges and the collection of the delinquent amounts. According to the USDA, unpaid meal charges are considered delinquent debt and remain such as long as it is considered collectible and efforts are being made to collect it. The USDA further stated in its memorandum that once collection efforts for delinquent debt are useless or too costly, the debt must be classified as bad debt. Additionally, while bad debt may be written off as an operating loss, school districts may not use federal funds to restore the loss. Revisions to policy 8500 address bad debt issues in the food service program context as well as meal charges. Finally, we have provided a non-mandatory option in the policy that requires a report to Department of Children and Families if accumulated charges remain unpaid. This is not intended to serve as a collection tactic, but more out of concern for student well-being if it appears that a particular student is being deprived. Just to jump to the end before we start, we have not chosen to elect to use the option for reporting to DCF. We have chosen not to do that at this time. On page 2 of 7, you'll see the new language. The superintendent shall recommend and the board shall approve the cost of meals for elementary, middle, and high schools annually. So our prices still hold at $1.25 for breakfast district-wide. Elementary lunch is $2.25. Middle and high school are $2.50. The board recognizes the circumstances may result in a student needing to charge for meals if his or her account has an insufficient balance to cover the charge. However, no account will be allowed to exceed a significant negative balance except as established below. So the specific language there is a significant negative balance. There is no set dollar amount. Every district is different. So that price is pretty interpretive. The superintendent shall develop procedures regarding meal charges, which will be implemented by, and we've chosen Mr. Patrick McCarty, the District Food and Nutrition Service Director. This procedure will provide directions so students district-wide who are eligible for reduced prices will pay the established price, but do not have funds in their accounts or in hand to cover the cost of the meals at that time. The parents of students who charge meals are notified when a student charges a meal, and that efforts are made to collect the charges made so that the unpaid charges are not classified as bad debt. That is a phone call. Your child didn't have money, they're in the negative, or they charged today, you will get that phone call immediately. A student whose account has significant negative balance may not charge or purchase an a la carte item. There's no ice cream or cookies or the good stuff if you are in the negative. So here we have options 1 or 2. At this time, working with Neola, we've selected option 1, but we're open for suggestions from the board. If a student has a significant negative lunch account balance, he or she shall be provided a regular reimbursable meal that follows the USDA meal pattern, the cost of which shall continue to accrue to his or her significant negative balance. The student's parents shall be contacted within the outstanding charges. So you don't have money that day. Elementary, you can charge up to $10. Middle school, you can charge up to $5, and high school is $3.75. So you can charge up to that amount for a regular meal, and at that point, you'll be given the alternate option, which has been upgraded to the turkey and cheese sandwich with the fruit cup and a choice of vegetable or milk. So that is a significant upgrade from years past from just a plain cheese sandwich. So we're pleased with what our Food Nutrition Services is offering students who don't have money and cannot charge at that point. Any questions at this time? Ms. Justice, yes.
Why the difference in the money?
I asked Patrick that as well, too. He felt that high school students, you should be able to tell them within a day, and they should be able to reimburse that amount. More of a responsibility factor compared to elementary. The message may not get home right away. The note in the backpack may get lost, so elementary has more of a cushion than middle and then high school. Also, high school, they have, he feels more access to financial support if they're working themselves. But that was the reasoning behind it. I did ask the same thing. And those prices, you know, we can be flexible with. We set those at the district ourselves. So.
What do we charge for that meal? The turkey cheese?
That is the free meal. That is the alternate meal.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the second option, it would say that you could give another meal that you would charge for, that it would be at a lower cost?
Yes. And like I said, we selected one working with Neola, but, you know, we're open for flexibility. When a student exceeds the charge limit, the department has eliminated the cheese sandwich, and we now offer the fresh turkey cheese sandwich and fruit cup. So that is there in place whether you're charging or not. So.
Do we keep an accounting of, because it is free, do we keep an accounting of the student who's coming through every day receiving the free lunch?
Yes. Yes. So everything is still put into, is it Meals Plus, Elizabeth?
Yes, so
Yeah.
I'm a registered dietitian, everyone. I'm standing in for Patrick today. You can go into our database, which is called Meals Plus, in our accounting system. It has numerous applications, and you can see day by day which students have been given an alternate meal and for how many days they received it. So you can run a weekly report, and sometimes you can see a student 3 times in a row or 1 time.
Yes, ma'am.
What do we do, and I know, I'm sorry, we're getting off this, off what we're doing here. What do we do when we see a student that just keeps reoccurring, getting the free meals, and the parent's not filling out the application? Is there any other steps that we could take to help that student?
Well, I'll share, and then Elizabeth, she can share as well, too. Letters in the backpack, phone calls home, school messenger, And at title schools, we would actually bring the parents in on parent night, conference nights, and fill out the forms with them. We'd offer the support to fill those out. Phone calls until someone does come in. That's why Neola has, issued that non-mandatory option of using DCF as leverage to do that. That's what that is in there for, to use. Is it neglect? Well, if you were eating a cheese sandwich, for the rest of the year, probably wouldn't be the most healthy, but since we're offering a nutritious alternate meal. Elizabeth?
So just, as Mr. Trustee, we make every reasonable effort to contact the parent, and those efforts are a daily phone call. There's also a letter to the student who can travel, and they do try to reach the parent most of the time, that it is resolved. However, some of the high school students have learned like a loophole where they'll pay for that day, yeah, but the debt still incurs. But what we have done to mitigate that stigmatization is that sandwich is offered every day, so students have a choice to take it in addition to the regular meal. So it's not made as it's not as open to the other students, and students do take that.
Anything else? We need to move on, so go ahead.
And the last caveat on that is if you end the year on free or reduced lunch, if you end the year, you're free and reduced for the first 30 days of school. So for the first 30 days of school, you don't really have to do any paperwork. We want the paperwork within the first 10 days, but that's where the cafeteria manager, the teacher, and the administration are constantly, during open house and orientations, getting that paperwork filled out so we don't reach that 30-day threshold.
Mr. Cersei, I have one more question. So I've often heard our lunch prices stayed the same, $2.25 for quite some time, and I've often heard that we have a fairly healthy food service fund, because have we ever considered lowering the price of the lunch if we're able to do so and help parents out, the parents that are paying for the lunch? Is that something we've ever looked into, and could we do that?
You're asking me or
I
John?
have not explored that yet, Ms. Justice, just being new. I don't know, Carter.
I have
previous years?
worked in another school district that they have done that. They have offered free breakfast for an entire year, just to burn down the fund balance. I know that Mr. McCarty has, and we brought this to the board, looking at replacing a lot of the capital equipment in our kitchens. They are outdated, they are shot, they need to be replaced. So I'm not sure that's part of the strategy that's upcoming or being considered, but I do know that there are capital replacements being done. VBE, I think, was the latest one that they did.
So what I know to be true is that there are probably families that are paying for lunches that are what we might call like income constrained. They may be able to afford to pay the lunch and haven't gone and asked for that free and reduced lunch. But that if we are able to help those parents out and reduce our lunch costs, burning off fund balance and free breakfast isn't really something that sounds great to my ears. So if there is some way that we could, lower that lunch rate as a mom who pays for 4 kids to eat school lunch, $2.25 for one kid one day doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up pretty quickly. So if we could lower the price for those who choose to pay it.
Yeah, I will definitely speak with Mr. McCarty. We can do a cost analysis. I mean, our fund balance is doing very well now. We had excellent participation with Irma, more children coming through the line. I didn't have to buy my lunch, but I bought a la carte. I bought both. So we saw huge participation during the storms when we offered that free breakfast and lunch. But we can definitely explore that.
Plus, I'm not sure about, thank you. Can you really use that for capital funds, that money?
Yes. That is the food service fund balance. That is a allowed cost to utilize for capital equipment replacement.
As
yes.
long as it's put back into the
Into the
equipment.
program, yes.
Just want to clarify, when Mr. Morrison used the term fund balance, he was talking about the food
The
service.
food
account.
service fund balance, not general fund balance, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Go ahead.
And the final page, meal charges that are not collected in the year when the debt was incurred shall be classified as bad debt. As I explained before, we cannot use non-federal funding sources to reimburse them. The recommendations are to use other sources such as school or community organizations, PTAs, non-federal sources to reimburse the lunch program into the general fund to make that reimbursement. Once the uncollected delinquent debt charges are converted to bad debt, records relating to those charges must be maintained. So Ms. Zork, as your question, records must be maintained for the bad debt and the reimbursement and who's eating and how often they're eating. So those, I know Patrick, he is going to be running quarterly reports. He's going to be reporting, he and I will be looking at those together. We want to track the participation after the storm to ensure that it's still increasing to support the district's strategic plan. So we're already in the works to do that.
Any last question? Last piece then.
And that's my
That's yours.
That's actually the last policy review for the day. I want to thank staff for all their hard work presenting all this information. We did receive some valuable feedback from the boards. We will take that back and make some policy revisions on some of those. The others will be coming to you for approval probably pretty soon as we can calendar the public hearing and that kind of thing. We do have one additional agenda item that we were going to cover. We were going to take a break to set up for that. That topic will probably take at least 20 to 25 minutes. So I need Mr. Searcy to ask the pleasure of the board because that'll put us back past our allotted time.
You got to meet back at 5 o'clock, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I'm fine with it, I just do need to take
Yeah,
a break.
we're going to take 5,
Yeah.
one way or the other. And then there may not be a lot of questions allowed on the.
Yes, sir.
Make it 10.
We have a time
deal.
certain.
You got a time
We got to
certain?
give
gotta be
Javon
in
time
there.
to get the
Yes.
chairs set up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third item that we're going to cover today is I wanted to share with the board the results of an online survey we did regarding the recommendations of the School Start Time Committee and the recommended change or option 1. The board may recall that on August 22nd, we had a board workshop in which the School Start Time Committee made a presentation about the work that they had engaged in over a period of months and the conclusion that they came to and a recommended change that they were bringing forward to the board. I was not able to be with you at that meeting, and then subsequently to that meeting, we did launch an online survey on our website regarding the recommended option 1 and the work of the Start Time Committee. So I wanted to take some time to share with you the results of the survey and to get some feedback from the board as to what the next steps might be in this process. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that we'll go through fairly quickly, but you also have a hard copy in PDF form of the results of the survey. So we're going to be referring to both pieces of information as we go, the PowerPoint and the results of the online survey. First thing I want to do is remind the board that the committee that did this work on researching school start times and possible changes was a broad committee. Lots of members, members that are in the education profession, but also just community members, and a lot of members of organizations that support our students. Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, GYAC, a bunch of other organizations that are involved with the same customers that we're involved with, but may not, be a part of our organization directly. So I think it's good to note that many people were involved in this process. So they shared with you that their goal was to come to a consensus as to, based on the research and what the needs are and that kind of thing, and they did make a recommendation, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. They went through a lengthy process, several months, really analyzing the data thoroughly, and a lot of discussion back and forth throughout several meetings of pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages. And before I go any further, I just want to mention that we do have Liz Cannon here, who not only is president of the IRCEA, but she also sat on the committee, so she's a member of the committee. So she's got free rein to jump in and correct me at any time or add anything that she sees. So the committee shared with you what our current school start times and finish times are. So our high schools start very early at 7:10 a.m. and finish at about 2:05 p.m. And then the middle schools, for the most part, 7:50 a.m., so just before 8 o'clock, and finish at about 2:45. And the elementary schools starting later at 8:45, finishing at 3:20. They talked about, if we just remain with the status quo, what some of the advantages were and what the disadvantages were, or the pros and the cons. The pros are, we're familiar with this, seems to be working for the most part. Doesn't, if we don't change anything, we don't have to change any activities. There's no impact to the current situation for our families and how they transport their students to and from school or care for them or whatever. The cons, though, is that, starting the high schoolers, especially that early, is opposite of the research. And elementary school starting at 8:45 or so, that presents some families with the need for before care and after care. It is dark in the morning for the high school students, especially during the winter months. Late drop-off for the aftercare programs for elementary students can cause a bit of an issue. So through their research and their debate, they came up with a recommendation. And this is option 1 is the one that they recommended. It was a shift in the order of our schools and their start times and a shift in the times altogether. So elementary school was going to start first in option 1 at 7:50 a.m., finishing about 2:20 p.m. Most of the research that's out there about school start times focuses on the adolescents, on the teenagers, and the fact that the medical research indicates that their biorhythms seem to start later in the day. They would benefit from a later start time. There's some research, but not a lot of research out there that seems to indicate that the younger students would benefit from an earlier start time. So I think that's one of the reasons that the committee made this recommendation. High school starting at 8:30 is more in line with the research, and then the middle schoolers starting at 9:05. That isn't really in line with any of the research other than it is later in the day, and the biorhythms for those teenagers and pre-teenagers might work better, but this is really more the function of we have to have 3 tiers the way we operate our transportation system right now, so someone's got to go in a later slot and it's the middle schools. So the advantages to option one that the committee presented to the board was that it does support the research that the older students would start later. It would probably eliminate the need for before care for elementary school students. There are several districts in Florida and across the country who have implemented this and seem to be successful with it. It's not starting the high school so late that there's no time for after-school activities, and it does, address the fact that maybe the elementary students are more alert in the morning, ready to go. The cons, though, the disadvantages are if the elementary school students start first, there's no aftercare that could be provided by the high school or middle school students right after school. There's a big split between the two grade spans that seem most closely together, the elementary and the middle. And their opinion requires aftercare that's more structured. I imagine that's for the elementary because it's a longer period of time. There was a concern from middle school parents that, how do I get my son or daughter to school in the morning if it's later than it currently is? I got to go to work. Who's going to get my son or daughter to the bus stop? And as it was dark in the morning for the high school students, it would be dark in the morning for the elementary school students. And then an impact on middle school sports. That right now we have a robust middle school athletic programs. If we were finishing later in the day, how does that impact those middle school sports? It might not. So the committee gave you some recommendations of what would be next if the board were to approve. They met with you to seek approval. If the board were to be in favor of this, we would have to market it, get the word out, and then we'd have to really work with a bunch of different agencies to accommodate these changes. So that was the work of the committee. So one of the things that we did as a result was do that online survey. So I want to take a few minutes and share with you the results of the online survey, unless there's anything Liz wants to add. Okay. So you have the online survey results. That's in you have the more detailed packet here. I've put some of the highlights or the 3,000-foot level information in the PowerPoint. So the online survey yielded almost 600 responses, 571 responses. And if you look at the types of responses, parents were by far the most participants in the survey. The largest number of participants in the survey were parents. 58% of the respondents classified themselves as parents. I think it was great to see that there were 95 students that participated and 94 educators. Now, there may be plenty of educators that were also parents and maybe they coded themselves as a parent when they took the survey. So a pretty good cross-section. So one of the first question on the survey was, have you reviewed the school start time presentation available next to the survey on the district website? So the idea was we had the work of the school start time committee there for them to review before they took the survey, and the overwhelmingly the number of responses, 93% said, yes, I reviewed the school start time presentation before I took the survey. The second question was, did your opinion change after reading the presentation? And the overwhelming majority was no. So they kind of had their mind made up even though they read through the presentation and looked at all the materials. Only 18% said they changed. That's 1 in 5. That's a few, but the majority, 74%, almost 3 in 4, said, no, I kind of knew which way I would vote, or
I do want to
my
point
opinion
out that
was.
it was after reading the presentation, not necessarily the research.
True. To Liz's point is, the presentation was the presentation. It wasn't a thorough discussion of the research. You would have to take more time to do that. Third question was, would you support the school district of Indian River County in changing the school start times to option 1? So in other words, do you support this recommendation of the school start times committee? The majority, 52%, said no. 39% though did say yes. So even though the majority said no, 52%, the 296 responses represents 52%. There were 222 that said yes. So 52 to 39, but if you were, had to make your decision based on that, the answer would be no. So drilling down a little bit further, what the respondents were asked, if you did support option 1, why would you support changing to option 1? And so that's the next question. And by far, medical research was the number one reason. 28, almost 29% of those cited the medical research as one of the reasons why they would support. To note, this question, they could pick more than one. So there, it wasn't just one or the other. It could be the medical research. It could be that it's more accommodating to my schedule. It could be that I think it's safer for students and so on. They could choose more than one. But of the 222 people who said they would support option one, their reasoning was most closely tied to the medical research, 165, if you believe that those are out of the 222.
And this question also begins where people could make comments related to, and the comments for this question are on page 10 of 29 in the packet. Some are helpful, some are not.
Yeah, I think with the comments, and we'll talk about that more at the end, they run the gamut from people you can tell who have read the research and are making some educated comments for or against, and some people who haven't read the research and are making some comments that aren't necessarily helpful. So conversely, if you do not support option one as the new school start time, why or why not? And so in this question, what made you decide that, or to vote against it, so to speak? And there's not one clear winner in this list of categories, but there are several of the reasons or choices that have strong support. So does not accommodate my job hours, does not accommodate my schedule are the two that have the most responses. So you could argue that we shouldn't be making decisions on whether it accommodates my job schedule or my hours and that kind of thing, but that's the responses. The lack of health care or before and after care, and the fact that it's not safe were also necessarily not safe for my children or not safe for my students, also received a large number of responses. Now, to drill down, if you look at the comments in the section as well, some of them, it's an elementary parent maybe that's saying, I don't have anybody to care for my children after school, so that's why I say it's not safe for my children. It also could be a middle school parent who's used to dropping their son or daughter off on their way to work, and if the middle school's times were later, does not accommodate their job hours or their schedule. So again, these are some of the reasons why they would say yes or no. Well, no. All right. So with that as the PowerPoint, I wanted to share all of those responses with the board to see, that they knew, to make sure that you had all the information that we had gathered on, possible changes to school start times, not just the PowerPoint presentation and the information from the school start time committee, but also the research, or the results rather, of the online survey. One of the things that I want to make sure that everybody understands is that this committee should be commended for the amount of time and effort that they put in. And I know there were comments made at the August 22nd workshop as well. This is not a easy dilemma to work with. There are advantages and disadvantages to every schedule. There are advantages to keeping the status quo. There are advantages to, changing either to option one or a different option. What I wanted to do today was make sure that you got the information that was gathered from the online survey, and then ask you if there's any direction from the board as to what happens next. The feedback from the community was not in favor necessarily of moving forward with option one. So I want to make sure, I want to get the board's feedback on that. Some members of the committee have, and wanted to come today, but some couldn't. They want to make sure that the board understands that there's no perfect solution, and if the board is not necessarily in favor of moving forward with option one, we kind of want to know, they kind of want to know, do you want us to continue exploring other options? Or is this something that the board is, not interested in pursuing at all? Liz, anything else to add?
No.
One question about everybody. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No,
Well, I want to thank, because there's no one else here, thank you for the time. It was a lot of effort, but, it wasn't a vote, it was a survey, and there was a no. I received so many emails, don't change the schedule. The middle school time, I don't like. And other things is, yes, it will, because I know I'm a sports person, there's many middle schools that don't have lights. You will not be able to have baseball games You know, a lot of the schools, you have to rush in and you even have to call them early because there's no lights. We don't provide lights. So if you move the day, that's not a big reason. I also, as a personal conservative person, you know, like I said, the public has talked, and the big thing that shouts out to me on the survey is safe. When I start seeing big numbers like that on safe, I'm not going to question somebody saying safe, whether it's because strangers will watch my children or I just don't think my kids are going to be safe walking home in the dark. The dilemma always was, for me as well, you know, when my kid got to middle school is, you know, he's not going to, you know, you're not going to get a babysitter, but gosh, you know, you hate them to be alone because it's at a sensitive age. That's, and a lot of mischief can occur, even with the nicest kids. So, but my biggest problem is that, you know, when I mentioned the conservative is the lifestyle of electronics. I mean, people shouldn't, and I'm guilty of it, hitting my electronics the minute I wake up, using them till 10 or 11 and not being able to fall asleep. Mr. Searcy, we've talked about this as far as, you know, the old days where the kids got up and they helped on the farm for a good 2 hours before they went out to work. They ate, you know, they worked hard. And Sean, I mean, I know when we were in the service, they put us to bed at 7. We didn't like it. We were adults. And then they banged the can at 4 in the morning to get us up. I mean, you know, circadian, whatever that, you know, rhythms, I throw that out the thing because, you know, it's sunrise to sunset usually, but because of our electronics, we are living past that. So all that studies are nice, but it just depends your perception of how you feel about that, about just good old-fashioned, wholesome living and good choices by parents, making sure children are, you know, brushing their teeth before they go to bed reasonably, shutting that stuff off. So there's a lot of reasons, but I don't have to do my personal reasons. It's a big no means no. They said no here, and they said no in all those emails to me. So that's my, it's not a question, it's just I have to go with what my constituents write me. So I don't feel that I appreciate all the work, but I don't want to keep putting a square peg in a round hole and just keep trying to force a change that's convenient. I think there was a lot of time put in. It's not for me.
John.
One thing and first of all, thank you for all the hard work. I mean, clearly this has been an ongoing project for a very long time. It's very well thought out, very well presented. I would be interested in, the only thing in which I would be interested is exploration of Occam's razor approach to this is, can we just start later? I know that's, I guess that runs into some things with some extracurriculars or things along those lines. So perhaps it was already explored. One community member brought that to me, and I said, well, you know, I guess that's so simple. It's probably too simple, but I love the idea of maybe let's just start later. Let's start a little bit later, but without exploring that, you know, to Mrs. Simchek's point, you know, we are a constitutional republic, and you know, the folks seem to think that this isn't something they're ready for, and maybe they haven't read the research or the data, but the public, there doesn't seem to be a great appetite for it.
Short.
I had sat through several of the committee meetings, and there was a lot of hard work, and there was a lot of discussion, and I was hoping in the meetings that something was going to come up that I hadn't thought about. The only thing that I would be in favor for would be looking at transportation, we only have about 20 minutes of flexibility here. I would be in favor of moving high school to 7:30, middle school to 8:20, and elementary to 9 o'clock. But that's, like you said, shifting it back is the only thing that I would be in favor of. Or would it be up, back?
Later. Yeah.
Is this a chair requirement to speak, or?
Well, I mean,
Pointed at, all right.
Time is of the essence
So
here.
I do believe in the medical research, and we did have a lot of high school teachers that spoke about the fact that they are having trouble with high school students focusing first and second period. And in setting our students up for success, we want to make sure that they're in school and they're able to pay attention. And you know, the other problem with just making everything later is there is a lot of research actually that supports elementary school students starting earlier. That they wake up earlier. Elementary school students get tired later in the day. You see referral rates go up. There are different issues with food and snacks, and there are all different types of things that happen. So I don't know how I feel about just making everybody later. There is no perfect solution. What's happening now is not working for everyone. If we changed it, it would not work for everyone. We've had this discussion before. The one thing that really for option one for me was that when they went to transportation and they asked about when elementary school students would need to be picked up at the bus stop, it would be as early as 6:30, and that's just too early. Having elementary school students out at bus stops, they should be supervised. I don't know that they always are, and it just seems like a dangerous situation, so.
I would just like to add that that is also my main concern, is the young ones out early, and especially since we haven't even operationally defined what a bus stop is.
Right.
Right.
May
That-
I ask
that's an
Dr.
issue.
Rendell?
True.
Yes, ma'am.
At that last committee meeting, we discussed having a mock bus schedule for elementary at this. Did we ever receive that?
Yes, I asked transportation, I think it's in the email about today's meeting,
Okay.
that transportation right now said without adjusting how we do the routes, if we moved the elementary to the first tier and had them start at the time recommended in option one, the first bus stop could be as early as 6:30 a.m. And, that's a concern. But that could be adjusted if we were to shorten the length of our elementary routes, but that would mean more buses and more drivers. So that's a cost. So, I mean, a lot of solutions can be, a lot of problems or hurdles can be overcome with money. That's one that could be overcome with money if we had, instead of 50 buses, we had 100. The routes could be really short, and they could be shorter in length. But,
Well, you could also lengthen the commute from the door to the, whatever we determine as a bus stop.
I imagine we could do
Right,
that,
by
too.
having fewer stops,
Yep.
that's an option.
No,
Not that
I
not
just
that
want to
I'm
make sure
suggesting
everybody
that,
got
but-
the emails. I'm pretty sure I looked and I saw everybody's name on it, but sometimes people just write you.
Yeah.
I got an overwhelming, and they keep coming, by the way. So I just want to make sure, is everybody else getting the emails of they're not in favor, please don't? Real tearjerker,
Yes.
letters, not to change anything.
About people losing jobs and such.
There is no perfect answer to it.
I do also
Flip
want
the
to point
coin.
out one other thing, that the survey had 571 respondents, and there are approximately 18,000 students in the district. So it is,
And this option one was approved unanimously in that committee. We appoint committees to do that research and check stuff out for us and come back with their recommendations. They did, and at some point, we've either got to move on or throw this stuff in the garbage. One last statement from everybody, because we're running out of time.
Do you
Miss-
want just a
Miss
thumb up,
Justice.
thumb down?
No, we can't
No,
vote.
no.
No, we can't vote.
No, I think Liz would agree that, the feedback is clear that option one doesn't have the support to move forward from the board, and right now it doesn't have the support to move forward from the community. If you go back to the next steps, even the committee recommended that we would have to go out and educate the community and almost prove to them how the advantages of option one were going to outweigh the disadvantages of changing. And I've talked to several superintendents who have done this. I was in Brevard when we did this. And it takes a while to convince people. That it takes a year or two even for the positive changes to show up. One of the things that I've been kind of torn on this whole issue from the beginning, to be honest, because I was in a district that had early start time for high school and moved and saw the benefits. But I've also never been in a district like ours that has so much support for our students already built in after school. Our middle school students have so many supports available to them at the Boys and Girls Club, at GYAC, Crossover Mission, all the sports that we have at all the middle schools and stuff like that. So that support network would be altered in some form. Our before care and after care programs for our elementary school students seem to be working. We seem to be working with all of our agency partners in a very positive way. So all of that would be altered. Doesn't mean it would be for the worse, but I've never seen this much support already structured. And we would have to create new structures, especially in the morning for the middle school kids and that kind of thing if we were to switch. So, for me personally, I'm not sure that, that moving to option one would be worth, all of those different alterations. I can't predict that it would be. I do think that I'm going to work with staff in the next few months just to tinker a little bit with the schedule, the bus times, the routes, to see if there's efficiencies that we could gain. One of the things that's been pointed out in the course of this work, and maybe the board may remember some discussions we've had about hurricane makeup days and stuff like that. Our secondary student day is longer than is required. 6 hours and 50 minutes for the high school, 6 hours and 45 minutes for the middle school. Our elementary school students are only in session for 6 hours and 30 minutes. So that's one of the reasons why this tiered busing is tricky, because elementary school students are actually in session for the least amount of time. So when we're moving the middle school and the high school around, we need to know that the elementary is finishing sooner. So, if we looked at shortening the school day for the high school and middle school students, you could possibly bump them back later in the day and not affect the elementary school and stuff like that. But anyway, so we're probably going to have some conversations amongst staff, over the next few months. But, my impression from the board is that, we did the research, came up with a recommendation. The recommendation is now the support to move forward either from the community or the board. So we should probably, so to speak, stop talking about it so that people understand they don't need to keep emailing you and saying, don't do it, because we're not doing it.
Last thing is your last comments, whatever they want to be.
Well, that was
Four
it.
words, we're not doing it.
I heard
Now.
that too.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's going to be tabled.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned at 4:26.